Chapter 25:19. Of course, the blood did not belong to him. Instead, it belonged to the elders of the Gloomwater sect. The attacks from over a dozen primordial realm elders did not deal any heavy injuries to Genshin. They only left behind a few wounds that were neither too deep nor too shallow. That's right, there were only a few wounds. This was because the attacks from the primordial realm experts were not powerful enough. Although they had all reached the primordial realm, they were unable to get through the defenses of the chaotic body. They did not even leave a scratch. Genshin's chaotic body was just too tough. If the attacks of some primordial realm experts were not powerful enough, they would not be able to harm Genshin at all. Only the palm strike from the 9th heavenly layer infinite prime managed to injure Genshin. There was a bright red mark where the palm had struck Genshin's back. It was a bloody mess. Moreover, a great power had invaded Genshin's body. The power was so great that even his chaotic body was unable to endure it, causing his organs to shake up violently. His vitality surged. Genshin silently circulated his chaotic force. Immediately, tremendous strands of chaotic force surged out from his chaotic Naiden, surging through his body like a river. Wherever the chaotic force passed by, Genshin's wounds healed rapidly. In just a few seconds, the wounds on Genshin's body that were neither deep nor shallow healed at a visible rate. What a tough body! The greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect could not help but cry out when he saw the wounds on Genshin's back that he was not satisfied with. He became stern. However, he discovered that Genshin's wounds were healing at a visible rate soon afterwards. His eyes narrowed, and he could not help but gasp. How is this possible? The rest of the elders also noticed this phenomenon. Everyone was flabbergasted, as if they had seen a ghost. So many of their attacks had landed on Genshin at the same time, yet they only managed to leave behind some superficial wounds on Genshin. It was a great blow to them. At the same time, powerful senses of the soul clashed in the sky above the Gloomwater sect. When they came in contact, they discussed in a voice that only they could hear. Genshin's body really is tough. This child's strength has increased far too quickly. When the Azure Poseidon Palace opened last time, Genshin was only a Divine King. He was even hunted down by a few youngsters on the Divine King's throne. But in just a short amount of time, he has become so powerful that he can easily kill infinite primes. The main reason why his battle prowess is so great is because of the laws of the sword he has comprehended. His laws of the sword are just too powerful, far surpassing experts who have comprehended the laws of the sword at the same level. Just the laws of the sword is not enough to make his battle prowess so great. There's also the cultivation method he practices and the power he uses. On the Aqua Plane, many experts hidden in various places discussed Genshin. They were all quite interested. What Genshin cultivates seems to be the chaotic body. At this moment, a powerful senses of the soul sent out a message. It really is like the chaotic body. The battle prowess of the chaotic body is indeed unmatched among people of the same level. However, people who practice this cultivation method are destined to never reach the peak. Their accomplishments will be limited. Moreover, nurturing someone with the chaotic body requires tremendous amounts of cultivation resources. It's not worth it. That's exactly why cultivators of the chaotic body are so rare in our saints' world. However, it's said that there are still a few people who practice the chaotic body in the immortals' world. Genshin, just what grievances do you have with our Gloomwater sect? Why do you want to destroy our Gloomwater sect? The greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect bellowed out furiously. Only now did he truly understand just how difficult Genshin was to deal with. Not only was his battle prowess powerful, which was enough to suppress him, but his defenses were also so monstrous. Even the greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect felt pressured by this. With his strength, he could indeed suppress Genshin, but Genshin's tough body made him uncertain if he could kill Genshin successfully. Your Gloomwater sect's elder of mountains and seas killed my close friend. Tell me, is that a grievance?" Genshin stood with his sword. His voice was cold. In particular, when he thought about the dead Kea, killing intent churned in his heart. With that, I turned into a streak of light and shot through the air, stabbing towards an elder of the Gloomwater sect. It's actually the consequences of the ancestors' actions. The greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect sighed inside. After learning the reason, he understood that the grievances between the Gloomwater sect and Genshin would not be resolved peacefully. He immediately ordered, "All elders, get into a battle formation and attack the formation with the Divine King Realm disciples to save the Great Elder. I'll keep Genshin busy." With that, the greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect appeared before Genshin in a flash. Terrifying energy erupted from his body as he attacked Genshin with his full strength. He did not hope to kill Genshin. He only hoped to keep Genshin busy and prevent him from dealing with the other elders. When the greatest elder struck out, the other elders of the Yushui sect all dispersed, distancing themselves from Genshin. Afterwards, they gathered several dozen kilometers away and prepared to get into a battle formation. Below them, the Divine King Realm disciples of the Yushui sect quickly gathered together as well. Energy surged within them as they prepared to work with the elders to attack the 9 Tribulations incineration formation. Do you think your disciples can destroy the 9 Tribulations incineration formation without any worries just because you're keeping me busy? You underestimate me far too much, said Genshin coldly. Suddenly, dazzling light shone from his eyes. A sharp and brutal sword intent was hidden within them. At that moment, the concept of his ultimate way of the sword expanded, enveloping a radius of 100,000 kilometers in a single instance. The space there seemed to form an independent domain, and Genshin was the supreme ruler of the domain. Everything in the world was under his control. He could decide life and death with a single thought. Bang! 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 With a string of explosions, the several hundred Divine King Realm disciples of the Yushui sect actually exploded at that moment. All the Divine King Realm disciples were reduced to a bloody mist before they could even cry out. Their souls were wiped out. Afterwards, all their blood gathered together under the control of a mysterious power. In the end, it formed a huge, blood-red sword that was several thousand meters long. The huge sword was forged from the blood of several hundred Divine King Realm disciples. It pulsed with powerful energy. Afterwards, under the shocked gazes of the several dozen elders of the Yushui sect, the blood-red sword radiated with startling might. It directly charged into the sky with the power of the blood of several hundred Divine King Realm disciples and the sword intent of Genshin's ultimate way of the sword. P.S. Recently, many readers have been complaining about not being able to see the new chapters, no matter how many times they open the page. It's very tiring to wait for the new chapters. Actually, when Xiaoyao updated every day, he would notify them on Weixin's official account. At the same time, there would be a link to the original version on WeChat as well. There are also some readers who follow Chaotic Sword God on other platforms. However, some platforms are constantly out of sync. The other readers have already seen the new content every day, but these readers are still stuck at the update from 10 days ago. As a result, in order to let you know about the updates as soon as possible, please follow Xiaoyao's official account on WeChat, XingXingXiao110. Pinyin was the pen name of Xinxing Xiaoyao. It also had a number for the police, or it could be found by searching for Xinxing Xiaoyao on the official account. Chapter 2520. The death of several hundred Divine King and the huge sword condensed from the Divine King's blood all happened in a single instance. It happened so quickly that all the infinite primes above failed to return to their senses. The blood-red sword shot into the sky. It moved extremely quickly, and with a resplendent boom, it shot past the closest infinite prime elder. Immediately, blood splattered in the air. Even though the blood-red sword was condensed from blood, its sharpness was shocking. The infinite Prime Elder was directly cleaved in half by the blood-red sword. His soul was wiped out. After killing an elder, the blood-red sword did not slow down at all. Under Jianshin's control, it shot towards a second elder. The targets he chose were the weakest among the group of elders. This was because the weaker they were, the easier it would be to kill them. If he had chosen the stronger elders at the 6th or 7th heavenly layer right from the start, it would have been very difficult to kill them in a single strike. Clearly, Jianshin wanted to reduce the number of primordial realm experts in the Gloomwater sect as quickly as possible. Spurt, spurt, spurt. After killing the first elder, the blood-red great sword turned into a red sword shadow and pierced through the bodies of the second and third elders at an extremely fast speed. In the end, the sword condensed from the Divine King's blood was stopped by a 6th heavenly layer elder after killing 4 primordial realm elders. At the same time, Jianshin became heavily injured due to his distraction. The greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect condensed powerful pulses of energy in his hands. The power of laws turned into chains that struck Jianshin with devastating power. He wore a pair of gloves on his hands. They were forged from the hide of a divine beast and gave off the might of a god artifact. To no surprise, the gloves were a low-quality god artifact. The greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect was extremely powerful in the first place. Now that he had a god artifact, his attacks became even more terrifying. As a result, Jianshin's organs were shattered from the heavy strike. A fist-sized hole had even appeared in his chest. It was a bloody mess, and all his ribs had shattered. If other primordial realm experts were injured like this, their battle prowess would definitely be affected. However, Jianshin's greatest advantage with the chaotic body was not his supreme recovery or the destructive power of his chaotic force. Instead, it was his tough body. Under the support of the chaotic body, Jianshin's battle prowess was not affected at all. Instead, he became a vicious beast. After being injured, he became even more vicious, becoming fiercer and fiercer as he fought. Jianshin bellowed out at the sky, shaking up the mountains. With a thought, the blood-red sword that the 6th heavenly layer infinite prime blocked immediately exploded. Blood sprayed out in all directions like rain. The blood was not as simple as the blood of the Divine King. Every single droplet possessed powerful and sharp sword chi. All of the blood possessed the power of Jianshin's ultimate way of the sword. In the end, the power hidden within every single droplet was enough to make infinite primes change. Thousands of droplets of blood filled the sky. They did not shoot out blindly. Instead, under the control of Jianshin's mind, they split into over 30 streams and shot towards the remaining primordial realm elders. All of the elders were forced into a fluster. One after another, they used their various divine abilities and techniques to defend against the attacks of the blood. However, they were unable to maintain a formation against the 9 tribulations incineration formation after being disturbed. At the same time, stars appeared on the 9-star sword of heavenly ways in Jianshin's hand to block the first elder's attack. Jianshin, the old man, swears to grind your bones to dust. The first elder bellowed out furiously as he attacked even more furiously. The deaths of several hundred Divine King made his eyes bulge. They were the backbone of the Gloomwater sect. They were the future of the Gloomwater sect, yet they were all dead now. The elders of the Gloomwater sect were no longer in the mood to think about how Jianshin had killed so many Divine King. However, the powerful senses of the soul in the sky above the Gloomwater sect all sighed in amazement. He actually killed so many Divine King with a single thought. What ancient secret technique is this? It's so terrifying. The old man has lived for over 10 million years, but he's never seen or heard of such a powerful ability. I can vaguely sense that this ability seems to be derived from the laws of the sword that Jianshin has comprehended. With Jianshin's current level of cultivation, it's probably impossible for him to comprehend it through his own abilities. In my opinion, he's probably obtained the legacy of some great expert who has comprehended the laws of the sword, great expert who has comprehended the laws of the sword? There are extremely few great experts who have comprehended the laws of the sword in our saints' world. The most recent one was Sword Master Yun Qi from 10 million years ago. Sword Master Yun Qi was only a step away from becoming a sovereign of the world when he was at his peak. It's just a pity that he was slain by the 2 dark gold ape kings of the ancient great apes. How pitiful! Jianqin's appearance might allow our saints' world to gain another great expert who has comprehended the laws of the sword in the future. At this moment, there was a flash of light. Jianqin gave up on his battle with the greatest elder. He bathed in light as he charged towards the weaker elders with killing intent. Behind him, the first elder of the Gloomwater sect pursued relentlessly. The battle above the Gloomwater sect was devastating. The celestial bodies lost their luster. The fairy-like mountains where the Gloomwater sect originally resided had already been reduced to a mess by the shock waves of the battle. Mountains collapsed one after another, and countless huge craters appeared. Even the space there shook violently as the 2 sides fought. It was ripped apart again and again, revealing pitch-black cracks. The many disciples below the divine king of the Yushui sect had already fled in all directions. They were just too weak. The strongest among them were only over-gods, so they were unable to interfere in a battle between primordial realm experts. Even if they were to form a formation and gather everyone's power together, it would still be of no help. The battle that destroyed the Gloomwater sect had shaken up the entire aquaplane. People appeared one after another in the distance. There were quite a few of them, and they were all primordial realm experts. The battle this time had basically attracted all the primordial realm experts on the aquaplane. The powerful peak experts had all descended with the senses of their souls, while the weaker ones had come personally. Moreover, as time went on, many more god kings gathered here from all directions. All of them stayed in the distance, witnessing the unprecedented battle that was taking place in front of them. Chapter 25-21. After 7 days and 7 nights of bitter battle, Jianqin's wounds became heavier and heavier. More and more wounds appeared as well. Right now he seemed completely bloodied. Many areas of his blood had even dried up. The several dozen primordial realm experts of the Gloomwater sect who fought against him died to Jianqin's hands one after another during the 7 days. After over 20 primordial realm experts died, the remaining elders all shivered in fear. They lost the will to continue fighting, so they ignored the calls of the first elder and fled the Gloomwater sect. Jianqin was powerless to stop these people from fleeing. Even though he was more powerful than them, he was unable to make them all stay. In the end, only the 3 late infinite primes remained. Determination filled their eyes, and they completely disregarded their own lives. They were determined to fight to the death with Jianqin, regardless of whether the sect lived or died. Out of the 3 of them, one was at the 7th heavenly layer, one was at the 8th heavenly layer, and the last was the first elder who had reached the 9th heavenly layer. Working together, they completely suppressed Jianqin, causing Jianqin to become more and more injured. However, the 3 of them were not in a good state either. During the past 7 days, they had used forbidden techniques at the cost of their vitality to launch fatal attacks. They wanted to kill Jianqin completely and end the battle as quickly as possible. However, Jianqin's chaotic body fended them off every single time. Moreover, Jianqin's chaotic body was constantly recovering during the battle. Coupled with the assistance of Jianqin's healing pills, his wounds did not seem to be life-threatening even though they seemed horrible. This was because his battle prowess did not weaken at all despite being so heavily injured. The energy within him was endless, as if it was inexhaustible. On the other hand, the 3 elders had been fighting for a long time. They had also used up a lot of Yuan Qi when they used their secret techniques, causing them to gradually show signs of exhaustion. Jianqin's body is just too powerful. We can't keep wasting time like this. "We have to end the battle quickly," thought the first elder of the Gloomwater sect. He looked at the leather gloves on his hands, and reluctance filled his eyes. Even though the gloves were only low-quality god artifacts, they had reached the peak of low-quality god artifacts. Their value went without saying. Moreover, special god artifacts like gloves were extremely rare in the Saint's world. In order to forge a suitable god artifact for himself, he had paid a tremendous price and effort. However, soon afterwards, the first elder made up his mind. He suddenly tossed out the gloves on his hands. Swish! As soon as the gloves were tossed out, they turned into a blur and approached Genshin with extreme speed. Destructive energy charged out from the gloves. At the same time, the other two elders of the Gloomwater sect who fought against Genshin all retreated, pulling far away from Genshin. Genshin became alarmed. He suddenly felt a great sense of danger. He immediately locked onto the gloves, and he became extremely stern. "What boldness! You actually want the god artifact to explode!" Genshin called out. His presence had been locked onto by the gloves, or in other words, the artifact spirit of the god artifact had locked onto him. He could not flee or dodge. He could only face the attacks head-on. Genshin did not dare to be careless. He immediately circulated his chaotic force as hard as he could, pushing the defenses of the chaotic body to the limits. At the same time, the power of the laws of the sword condensed in the surroundings, forming a thick layer of protective light around Genshin. At the same time, the 9-star sword of heavenly ways in Genshin's hand erupted with powerful pulses of energy. He used the laws of the sword and the laws of strength at the same time as he suddenly swung his sword at the gloves. Boom! An earth-shaking boom rang out. The god artifact glove shone with the brightest light at that moment. As it released a world-shaking energy, it shattered into fragments that scattered in all directions. The explosion of a god artifact was just too powerful. It ripped through space and shattered the surroundings. When the terrifying ripples of energy expanded, it forced back the senses of the souls of many chaotic primes who were present. Even the primordial realm experts who had gathered around the Gloomwater sect from various places on the Aqua Plane were forced back by the ripples of energy. Genshin, who was at the center of the explosion, suffered devastating injuries. The 9-star sword of heavenly ways in his hand dimmed, and the protective light around him collapsed as soon as possible. His chaotic body was in tatters, and the flesh on his chest had vanished, revealing his shattered organs. That was not all. Even his right arm that wielded the sword had been severed at the base. Under the violent ripples of energy, the dim 9-star sword of heavenly ways and his entire right arm was blown away into the distance, landing on the ground. Genshin immediately became extremely pale. He was blown away like a broken kite. This time he was truly heavily injured. Even his chaotic body had been reduced to a horrible state. He was covered in wounds, which made him seem extremely miserable. With a flash, the greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect used this opportunity to pursue him. He passed through the devastating ripples of energy in a single instance and caught up to Genshin. He smiled coldly and directly sent a palm strike towards Genshin's head. He moved extremely quickly. "Genshin, old man, I'd like to see how you're going to block this palm strike now. Die. Only chaotic primes can kill me. You don't have the right to do that." Even though he was heavily injured and had lost an arm, Genshin did not panic at all. With a thought, a shocking sword chi immediately permeated the surroundings. An extremely bright, finger-sized strand of sword chi suddenly appeared above his head, shining with blinding light. This sword chi was the profound sword chi. Now that his life was on the line, he could no longer care about whether the profound sword chi would be recognized by others and expose his identity. He used it without any hesitation. The expression of the greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect suddenly changed. He could sense life-threatening danger from the small strand of sword chi. However, before he could even react, the small strand of sword chi turned into a streak of white light. It tore through space and time, stabbing over even faster than lightning. It stabbed into the greatest elder's forehead like a hot knife through butter. The greatest elder of the Gloomwater sect grunted. His face was filled with extreme pain. His soul had been heavily injured. Jinshin's eyes turned cold. He raised his remaining left hand and directly punched the greatest elder's head. Even though the greatest elder was a 9th heavenly layer infinite prime, his body was on a completely different level compared to Jinshin. His head directly exploded from Jinshin's palm strike, wiping out his soul. A 9th heavenly layer infinite prime had died. The 2 remaining elders were both surprised and furious when they saw the greatest elder's headless corpse. They had no idea how the greatest elder had died from the rampaging energy in the surroundings. However, after a single moment of hesitation, the 2 of them looked at each other and charged towards Jinshin decisively. There was nothing more to be said now. Only one of them could survive in the end. Jinshin's eyes were cold. He showed no fear. He reached out with his left hand, and a streak of light immediately flew over. The dim 9-star sword of heavenly ways returned to his hand. Even his severed right arm was stowed away. With Jinshin's level of cultivation, it was no longer difficult for him to recover his limbs. Even if his body was destroyed, he could reconstruct it. As long as he was given some time, he would be able to reattach his right arm. Jinshin wielded the sword in his left hand as his presence did not weaken. He stood in the air as if he could hold back 10,000 enemies, all by himself. P.S. Recently, many readers have been complaining about not being able to see the new chapters, even after opening the page many times a day. It's very tiring to wait for the new chapters. Actually, whenever Xiaoyao released new chapters every day, he would notify them on his official WeChat account. At the same time, there would be a link to the original chapters on his WeChat account. There are also some readers who follow the chaotic Sword God on other platforms. In the end, some platforms would not keep up with the updates for weeks to weeks. The other readers have already seen the new content every day, while some readers are still stuck at the updates from weeks to weeks ago. As a result, in order for you to know about the updates as soon as possible and see the new content, please follow Xiaoyao's official WeChat account, XingXingCiao110. Pinyin was the pseudonym of Xiaoyao Xinqing. There was also a number for the police, or you could directly search for Xinqing Xiaoyao on the official WeChat account. Chapter 25-22. He had a total of 3 strands of profound sword chi. Aside from the strand he had used to kill the first elder, he still had 2 strands left. These 2 strands just happened to be enough to deal with the 2 remaining elders. Originally, he should have been able to condense a 4th strand of profound sword chi as a sword immortal. However, condensing profound sword chi required quite a lot of time. It could take several years, or even a decade or 2. However, ever since he emerged from Poseidon's palace, he had either been rushing about or hiding his identity. He did not have the time to condense a 4th strand of profound sword chi at all. Even though there were still 3 strands of profound sword chi, the power of each strand was not constant. They would become more and more powerful as Jinshin's strength increased. As a result, after Jinshin became a sword immortal, the power of his profound sword chi had reached a whole new level. It was no longer the same as before. The 2 remaining strands of profound sword chi remained in Jinshin's soul, ready to be unleashed. However, at this moment, an extremely shocking pulse of energy appeared from afar. The space behind the 2 remaining elders of the Gloomwater sect shook violently. 2 strands of extremely powerful energy condensed into 2-meter-long hands, squeezing space as they shot towards the 2 elders. This was an attack from Su Ran. Perhaps she had sensed the danger that Jinshin posed, so she used this opportunity to attack the 2 elders while controlling the 9 Tribulations incineration formation with all her strength. The expressions of the 2 elders changed drastically when they faced the attacks of chaotic primes. They immediately used all the energy within them to form defenses as the power of laws revolved around them. However, before the attacks of a fifth heavenly layer chaotic prime, it was useless even if they defended with everything they had. The difference between the two sides was just too great. The palm condensed from Su Rant's energy was like a hot knife through butter, tearing through all of their defenses and striking their bodies. Spurt, spurt. The two 7th heavenly layer infinite primes and 8th heavenly layer infinite primes vomited blood when they opened their mouths. They were blown away like broken kites. They were extremely heavily injured. Su Ran placed most of her focus on the 9 tribulations incineration formation. Clearly, this strike was not her true strength, so she only heavily injured the 2 infinite primes. She did not kill them on the spot. Jianqin, kill them quickly. Su Rant's voice rang out. As he spoke, the 9 tribulations incineration formation that trapped the 4 grand elders shook. Jianqin's eyes turned cold. He looked at the 2 elders who had been blown away, and with a thought the 9-star sword of heavenly ways in his left hand immediately flew out. It turned into a streak of light and shot towards the 2 elders with lightning speed under his control. The 2 elders immediately tried to block it, but they were heavily injured after receiving a strike from Su Ran, a 5th heavenly layer chaotic prime. Their strength was drastically reduced, and they were extremely weak. They could not even unleash half of their peak condition. They only managed to block a few of Jianqin's attacks before their arms were severed by the 9-star sword of heavenly ways. In the final moment, Jianqin's eyes shone with powerful sword intent. The power of the ultimate way of the sword was added to the 9-star sword of heavenly ways. Under his control, the 9-star sword of heavenly ways shone with resplendent starlight, cleaving off the heads of the 2 elders and wiping them out. After 7 days and 7 nights of bitter battle, the infinite primes of the Gloomwater sect had either died or fled. Only the 4 great elders, who were chaotic primes, were still holding on bitterly. Jianqin did not show any joy after killing all the infinite primes. This time he wanted to destroy the Gloomwater sect and take revenge for Kaeya's death. As long as the chaotic primes remained alive, the Gloomwater sect would not be destroyed. The 9-star sword of heavenly ways shone with dim light as it hovered above Jianqin's head. Jianqin stared at the 9 tribulations incineration formation in the distance as he grabbed his severed right arm with his left hand steadily. As he circulated the chaotic force within him, the regenerative powers of the chaotic body were completely unleashed. The flesh where his arm had been severed wriggled, and the fracture vanished at a visible rate. In just a few seconds, Jianqin's right arm had reconnected with his body. Of course, what was connected was only the outermost layer of skin and flesh. The broken parts of the arm and the bones still needed some time to completely heal. However, Jianqin did not have enough time to wait for his arm to recover. He descended from the sky and removed the space rings of the primordial realm experts he had killed one by one. Primordial realm experts. Even if they were just infinite primes, they possessed astonishing wealth. They possessed over 20 space rings, and one of them even belonged to a 9th heavenly layer infinite prime. It was obvious just how astonishing all the space rings combined were. However, Jianqin did not just remove the space rings. He stowed away the corpses of the primordial realm experts as well. He did not leave a single one behind. The corpses of primordial realm experts were rare. They were the best food for the immortal devouring orchid. Why is Jianqin collecting their corpses? It's normal for him to take their space rings, but he's even collecting their corpses. This is the first time I've seen someone collect their corpses. Is Jianqin collecting the corpses of the elders of the Gloomwater sect? It looks like Jianqin is quite a righteous person. Although he has grievances with the Gloomwater sect and has destroyed them, he still treats the dead elders of the Gloomwater sect seriously, taking the initiative to collect their corpses so that the corpses of the primordial realm experts don't end up in the wilderness. In the distance, many people discussed Jianqin. They commented on him. and many of them were filled with admiration. However, Jianqin did not care about their discussions at all. After stowing away all the corpses of the primordial realm experts, he could not help but look in another direction. He was filled with pity. That was where the leader of the great elders of the Gloomwater sect, the 9th heavenly layer chaotic prime, was buried. He had been slain by the boy from the Myriad Bone Guild. His entire body had exploded, and he had died without a complete corpse. Jianqin sighed gently and sighed. Afterwards, he healed as he arrived at the edge of the 9 tribulations incineration formation. There were still a few chaotic primes trapped there. "Senior Su, let me assist you," said Jianqin. "How are your wounds?" Su Ran's voice rang out from the 9 tribulations incineration formation. She was not outside, keeping the chaotic primes busy. "I'm fine," said Jianqin. The chaotic body was just too tough. Even though he was heavily injured, his battle prowess was not affected much apart from the fact that he could not use his right arm. "All right then. Of the 4 chaotic primes trapped in the formation, I've already killed the early chaotic prime. The remaining 3 are 4th, 5th, and 8th heavenly layer chaotic primes. The 2 of them are under the protection of the 8th heavenly layer expert, so it'll be rather difficult for me to kill them. Jianqin, you control the 9 tribulations incineration formation. I'll use my full strength. Even if I have to pay the price of being injured, I have to kill the 4th heavenly layer expert. As long as one more person dies, they'll be even more affected by the formation, making it easier to deal with them," said Su Ran sternly. Chapter 25-23. The Profound Sword Chi was a heaven-defying ability at the peak of God tier. It was born from the laws of the world, and it was a peak ability that the old master of the Azulite swords had spent many years to create using his great cultivation. It was the trump card of Grand Exalts. Its profundity and power were not something that an ordinary divine tier battle skill could compare to. As a result, the 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime, trapped in the formation, was unable to dodge the attacks of the 2 strands of profound sword chi, even though he sensed them. The 2 strands of profound sword chi directly ignored the energy defenses around him. As streaks of light, they shot into the 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime's forehead at the same time with unbelievable speed. Immediately, a moment of confusion appeared in the 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime's eyes. His movements became rather sluggish at that moment as well. However, that was all. He remained the same as before after being attacked by the 2 strands of profound sword chi. He did not show any pain at all. He only blanked out for a moment. However, this absent-mindedness only lasted for an instant. Very soon, his eyes regained their clarity. He was an 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime after all. His soul was just too powerful. Jianqin's current profound sword chi was more than enough to deal with 9th heavenly layer infinite primes, but it was still lacking when it came to dealing with 8th heavenly layer chaotic primes. Let alone 2 strands of profound sword chi. Even 3 strands of profound sword chi would struggle to injure an expert like that. However, Jianqin was not the only one who attacked the 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime. There was also Su Ran, who was trapped in the formation. As a result, Su Ran struck out decisively the moment the 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime had blanked out. Laws wove together in her shriveled hand, sending it towards the 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime's head with terrifying energy. Wherever her hand passed by, space cracked. It was extremely powerful, enough to destroy the world. As soon as the 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime of the Gloomwater sect returned to his senses, Su Ran's hand had already shattered his protective energy and arrived above his head. His face changed drastically. In that short moment of absent-mindedness, the final outcome had already been decided. Bang! With a muffled sound, the great elder's head exploded from Su Ran's palm strike. Moreover, Su Ran's palm strike was just too powerful. After shattering his head, the destructive power in the palm did not weaken at all as it continued to descend. In the end, The eighth heavenly layer, chaotic prime great elder, was reduced to a bloody mist by Su Ran. Nothing remained of him. Jian Qin, who hovered outside the 9 tribulations incineration formation, felt pained when he saw this. This was the body of an 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime. If he fed it to the immortal devouring orchid, the orchid's strength would increase by a lot. But now the corpse had exploded, leaving nothing behind. The body of an 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime was no longer of much value. Senior Su, if it's possible, do your best to keep their bodies. Jianqin said to Su Ran, the corpses of chaotic primes were just too difficult to obtain. As long as there was even the slightest chance of obtaining them, he would not miss out on any of them. This was because the growth of the immortal devouring orchid required a large number of corpses. Without the protection of an 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime, the 2 mid-chaotic prime great elders trapped in the formation did not last very long against Su Ran. They died one after another. Su Ran fulfilled Jianqin's request as well. She purposefully controlled her power when she killed the 2 chaotic primes. She left their corpses intact. With the battle over, Su Ran dispelled the 9 tribulations incineration formation. Her face was rather pale, and exhaustion filled her face. Clearly, even with the assistance of the 9 tribulations incineration formation, it was not easy for her. She had even suffered some injuries. The 9 tribulations incineration formation has become rather damaged. After all, it can only be used against 7th heavenly layer chaotic primes. If I use it again, its power will decrease once more. Su Ran looked at the formation banners in her hand as her heart ached. As for Jianqin, he flew to where the 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime had died with a jade bottle in his hand. Before the blood had fallen to the ground, he collected it as quickly as he could. The blood also pulsed with very powerful energy. It could be used to increase the strength of the immortal devouring orchid. All the experts gathered outside the Gloomwater sect fell silent. They stared at the ruined Gloomwater sect with mixed feelings. The great elders were dead, and the infinite prime elders had either died or fled. All the divine king disciples had died as well. As for the disciples below the divine king, they had used the opportunity to flee long ago. No one knew where they went. They knew that from today onwards, the Gloomwater sect had truly been destroyed. Even if a few disciples remained, they would not be able to cause much trouble. A mighty peak sect has been destroyed just like that. Sigh, from today onwards, the number of peak organizations on the Aqua Blue planet will be reduced by 1 more. The ancestor of the Gloomwater sect, the elder of mountains and seas, is probably done, for the Gloomwater sect has truly been destroyed. In the surroundings, many experts were discussing and sighing endlessly. The powerful senses of the soul that hovered above the Gloomwater sect communicated with one another secretly. They all sighed emotionally. We can completely forget about the Gloomwater sect. It's a pity that the hell water that the Gloomwater sect has been hiding all these years has gone to Jianqin for nothing. Even the Point Cloud Venerable has stepped forward. Even though the hell water is precious, it's not worth offending the Point Cloud Venerable over some hell water. The news of the Gloomwater sect's destruction spread across the entire aquaplane like a storm. It stirred up huge waves across the entire plane, leaving countless people stunned. After all, the Gloomwater sect was a famed peak organization on the aquaplane. In the eyes of many cultivators, the Gloomwater sect was a supreme sect that was unreachable. Now that it had been destroyed in the blink of an eye, it was just too shocking and unbelievable. In the following period of time, people could be heard discussing Jianqin's destruction of the Gloomwater sect across the entire aquaplane. They whispered to each other and engaged in heated discussions. The person who had caused all of this, Jianqin, sat with Su Ran in the ruins of the Gloomwater sect, healing his wounds. This place was originally a beautiful mountain range. The mountains stacked on top of each other and were shrouded in mist. It was as beautiful as a paradise. But now, this place had been turned into a barren land. Not only had all the mountains been razed to the ground, but the entire land had also sunk in from the 7 days of battle. Many bottomless pits had appeared. Chapter 25-24. The Gloomwater sect had been destroyed by him. The elder of mountains and seas had died. The 5 great elders had died, and even most of the elders had been slain by him. The Gloomwater sect had been erased from the aquaplane. However, the people who had passed away could never return. The pretty face that had once appeared before him, the beautiful figure that had once appeared before him, would never be seen again. All that remained was an unforgettable memory in his head. At the same time, a hazy figure that was drowned out by the light of ways sat in the depths of the heavenly palace of Bishing. It was impossible to make out his figure or face. All that could be seen was a pair of cold eyes. The space before him seemed like a mirror. It clearly reflected what happened in the Gloomwater sect on the aquaplane. To no surprise, Jianqin and Su Ran were there as well. His cold and emotionless gaze seemed to be fixed on Jianqin, but it also seemed to be fixed on something else. When Jianqin's voice rang out, the cold and emotionless gaze actually wavered slightly, as if he had become rather stunned at that moment. Profound sword chi. I never thought that Jianqin had even grasped the profound sword chi. That's that old bastard's greatest trump, card aside from the fusion of the 2 swords. At the same time, the blood-tier Grand Exalt, who was enveloped in a layer of blood-red light on the distant Devour plane, murmured to himself. And this Jianqin has actually comprehended the ultimate way of the sword. Only the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt has grasped the ultimate way of the sword out of the 2 great sword gods of the Immortals world. Jianqin already has the potential to become a sword god. If he matures successfully, it's extremely likely for him to become a sword god in the future. He just happens to be able to condense the 9th strand of profound sword chi as a sword god. Once he condenses the 9th strand of profound sword chi, its power will be earth-shaking. However, he's already become a fruit of ways of Anitta, so he's destined to not be able to go that far. The blood-tier Grand Exalt muttered to himself. In the ruins of the Gloomwater sect on the aquaplane, Jianqin had basically reconnected his severed right arm after a day of healing. The bones in his arm had reconnected. Even though he had not fully recovered and could not fight like before, it no longer affected his movements. In addition, even the sinister wounds that covered his broken body had mostly healed. The shattered flesh on his chest had also regrown. Of course, this was only a superficial recovery. He was just too heavily injured this time. Even with the supreme recovery of the chaotic body, it was difficult for him to make a full recovery in a single day. His wounds were still very severe. This time, I'm afraid that I will need half a month to recuperate before I can return to my peak. Sensing the injuries in his body, Jianqin secretly thought in his heart, this was already sufficiently shocking. After all, if it was any other expert who suffered such serious injuries, it would probably take them thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, or even longer before they could fully recover. However, Jianqin only needed half a month. A day later, Jianqin stood up and began to clean up the battlefield. As a peak sect, the Gloomwater sect naturally possessed extremely deep heritage. They possessed countless cultivation resources, cultivation methods, and battle skills. To Jianqin, this was an extremely shocking amount of wealth. So he obviously had to collect it all. With a flash, he arrived before a huge crater 100 kilometers away. He leapt in. Before long, the ground gently trembled. The soil around the crater rose and fell violently. A huge divine hall slowly rose up from the crater. Jianqin raised his hands below the divine hall. He erupted with astonishing strength and lifted the divine hall up from the bottom of the crater. Bang! With a thud, the entire ground shook violently. Jianqin threw the divine hall to the ground heavily. This divine hall is a medium-quality god artifact, but it's one of the weakest among medium-quality god artifacts. Su Ran also appeared near the divine hall. She studied the divine hall calmly and continued. This divine hall is the only medium quality god artifact of the Yushui sect. All of the Yushui sect's wealth should be in this divine hall. However, it won't be easy for you to enter the divine hall. First, you need to obtain the recognition of the artifact spirit of the divine hall and become the master of the divine hall. Genshin stood before the divine hall and stared at the entrance silently. He had already expanded the senses of his soul, communicating with the divine hall spirit. My master is the elder of mountains and seas. My master died because of you, and you destroyed the sect that my master founded after so much difficulty. I will never accept you as my master. The artifact spirit of the divine hall said coldly. It was extremely stubborn. Afterwards, the divine hall began to shrink. In the end, it became the size of a thumb and flew out, landing before an infinite prime 100 kilometers away. I accept you as my master. Are you willing to become my master? The artifact spirit of the divine hall said to the middle-aged infinite prime. It was not confused. There was a reason why it had chosen this middle-aged man who was only an infinite prime as its master. This was because the middle-aged man possessed a rather great status on the Aquaplane. He was the current master of the Scorching Sun sect. The Scorching Sun sect was a peak organization on the same level as the Gloomwater sect on the Aquaplane. The ancestor of the Scorching Sun sect was also a peak expert who stood at the apex of the plane. The artifact spirit of the Gloomwater sect would rather accept someone else as its master than yield to Genshin. A gleam of light flashed through the sect master's eyes. He did not win immediately. Instead, he hesitated. The medium quality god artifact contained all the resources and wealth of the Gloomwater sect. Even to the entire Scorching Sun sect, it was extremely tempting. However, he also remembered his ancestor's warning. He could not get involved in the mess that was the Gloomwater sect. Many gazes gathered on the Setting Sun sect leader's body, many of them revealing looks of envy. The gazes of some of the experts from the top factions, when they looked at the sect leader of the Setting Sun sect, became somewhat thought-provoking. They had received orders from the ancestor of the sect long ago that they were not to lay a finger on anything of the Gloomwater sect. Otherwise, how could the divine hall of the Gloomwater sect remain until now? It would have been taken away long ago. Genshin did not do anything. Instead, he stared at the sect master coldly. He did not recognize him, but the artifact spirit had actually chosen an infinite prime as its master. This could only mean that the middle-aged man's identity was rather extraordinary. He wanted to see just how great of a deterrent the Point Cloud Venerable's words were on the Aquaplane. After a moment of hesitation, the sect master shook his head in the end and declined the artifact spirit's request. This was because he had received a message from the ancestor of the Scorching Sun sect again. I have over a dozen droplets of hell water here. If you become my master and ensure that the legacy of the Gloomwater sect remains, these hell water droplets and vast amounts of resources will be yours. The artifact spirit roared at the sky. It knew that the senses of the souls of many peak experts were present. It wanted to tempt them with hell water. As expected, the senses of many powerful souls rippled when they heard about the hell water droplets. Clearly they were interested. Hell water was just too precious. It was enough to tempt them. At this moment, Suran snorted coldly. She arrived before the divine hall with a flash and directly pressed her hand against it. Terrifying energy surged and suppressed the divine hall. The divine hall suddenly swelled in size, becoming tens of thousands of meters wide in a single instance. It surged with light as it mobilized all the power within the divine hall to resist. I'm already a medium quality god artifact. I won't yield so easily. Even if you suppress me, I will never yield to you, the divine hall said stubbornly. Shouted the spirit stubbornly. Then it opened its mouth again and roared at the sky. It wanted to tempt the top cultivators who stood at the peak of the continent with the help of the dozen drops of underworld water. P.S. Recently, many readers have been complaining that they haven't seen any new chapters no matter how many times they open the page. It's very difficult to wait for new chapters. Actually, when Xiaoyao updated every day, he would notify them on his official WeChat account. At the same time, there would be a link to the original version on his WeChat account. Moreover, there are some readers who follow the chaotic sword god on other platforms. However, some platforms are always out of sync. The other readers have already seen the new content every day, but these readers are still stuck at the update from 10 days to half a month ago. As a result, in order for you to know about the updates as soon as possible and see the latest content, please follow Xiaoyao's official WeChat account, XingXingXiao110. Pinyin was the pen name of Xinqing Xiaoyao. There was also a number for the police, or you could find it by searching for Xinqing Xiaoyao on the official WeChat account. Chapter 25:25. The powerful senses of the soul above the Gloomwater sect clearly wavered slightly after the artifact, spirit, tossed out the temptation of hell water time and time again. They all began to hesitate inside. At that moment, the Point Cloud Venerable's words, a medium-quality god artifact, over a dozen droplets of hell water, and the wealth that the Gloomwater sect had accumulated over the years revolved around their minds. They were conflicted inside. The Point Cloud Venerable's words did indeed make them fearful, as the Point Cloud Venerable was a renowned expert on the star brilliance plane. He controlled the laws of space and the laws of time. With the two laws fused together, he possessed the ability to challenge those above him. There is no one more powerful than the Point Cloud Venerable on the entire aquaplane. However, they could not ignore the wealth that the Gloomwater sect had accumulated over the years. Jianqin stood before the divine hall as his face became uneasy. With his current strength, he could forcefully subdue low-quality god artifacts, but he felt powerless before the medium-quality god artifact before him. Although he could forcibly move the divine hall away with his strength, once the divine hall grew to 100,000 feet in size or even larger, would he have to carry a colossal object that was several times larger than a mountain across the void? After losing the Inata Tower, there was nothing on him that could store a medium-quality god artifact, unless the divine hall was willing to do so. At this moment, a hazy figure silently appeared in the sky. He was surrounded by the power of laws, which obscured his figure and prevented people from seeing his face. However, an extremely terrifying aura was faintly emitted from his body, causing the color of the world to change. This person was definitely a Grand Prime. His appearance caused the faces of Jianqin and Su Ran to sink slightly. They sensed that the situation was bad. "If you're willing to follow me, I can take you away," the Grand Prime said to the artifact spirit. His voice was old but powerful. "The matters of the Gloomwater sect have nothing to do with the old man. The old man can't be bothered to interfere either. If you submit to the old man won't be able to take you by force," he said again. Afterwards, he spoke again. He seemed to be talking to Jianqin and Su Ran, but he also seemed to be emphasizing his innocence to everyone. The expressions of Jianqin and Su Ran immediately changed when they heard that. "All right, I accept you as my master." The divine hall spirit agreed without any hesitation. It began to resist Su Ran's suppression with all its might, wanting to break free. The Grand Prime did not take action. Powerful power of laws permeated his surroundings as he hovered there leisurely as if he was waiting quietly. However, there was also an extremely obscure power emanating from his body, drifting towards the divine palace. He did not directly attack Su Ran because he wanted to take her by force. He was afraid of provoking the Point Cloud Venerable into action. However, if he helped the divine hall break free from Su Ran's suppression and allowed it to fly into his hands, it would be completely different. However, at this moment, a powerful pulse of energy appeared in outer space. An illusionary mountain appeared in outer space of the aquaplane, radiating with tremendous pressure. 7 figures sat on the illusionary mountain. Their presences were steady as energy surged from them. They seem to have fused with the mountain. It's the Martial Soul Mountain. The people of the Martial Soul lineage have come. All 7 people of the Martial Soul lineage have actually come. It's rumored that Jianqin possesses Martial Soul Force, and he's the 8th successor of the Martial Soul lineage. Without a doubt, the people of the Martial Soul lineage have come to receive Jianqin. With the appearance of the Martial Soul Mountain, all the peak experts on the Aqua Plane lost their composure. They all became stern. The expression of the Grand Prime who wanted to take the Divine Hall away changed as well. The power of laws revolved around him. "Ha! Brother Jianqin, I finally found you." A great laugh rang out. The black-robed Han Zong flew down from the Martial Soul Mountain. He moved like a bolt of lightning, appearing above the Gloomwater sect with a flash. "You're just a medium-quality god artifact. Becoming Brother Jianqin's master and joining our Martial Soul Mountain is your fortune. Yet you actually don't know what's good for you." "Humph!" Han Zong snorted coldly. He arrived before the Divine Hall with a flash and directly kicked out. Bang! With a heavy sound, the air exploded. The medium-quality god artifact was directly sent flying by Han Zhang's kick. "You ungrateful thing. If it weren't for the fact that your brother Jianqin spoils a battle, I would have smashed you to pieces with a punch long ago and made you disperse from the world." Han Zong cursed. Han Zong cursed. Afterwards, he opened his hand, and the Divine Hall he had kicked away seemed to be bound by a mysterious power. It returned to Han Zong. Han Zong directly struck the Divine Hall with his palm, erupting with devastating power and knocking the entire Divine Hall into the ground. Immediately, the Divine Hall dimmed. The many defensive formations that covered the Divine Hall all lost their effects at that moment. All the energy that powered the formations had been drained by Han Zhang's palm strike. The Divine Hall that was a medium-quality god artifact was nothing in Han Zhang's hands. All the spectating Primordial Realm experts gasped when they saw Han Zong destroy a medium-quality god artifact in such a brutal manner. Even the peak experts who hid in the dark and only paid attention to this place with the senses of the soul showed fear towards Han Zong. Jianqin finally let out a sigh of relief. He understood that as long as Han Zong was here, the people on the Aqua Plane would probably not dare to target the Divine Hall anymore. He had witnessed Han Zhang's battle prowess on the desolate plain. Even though the people of the Martial Soul lineage could not break through to Grand Prime, Han Zhang's battle prowess had definitely reached the level of Grand Primes. After knocking the Divine Hall into the ground, Han Zong looked at the Grand Prime who was surrounded by the power of laws. His eyes shone coldly, and he said coldly, "It seems like you were the one who wanted this Divine Hall earlier." "Not at all. Since this Divine Hall belongs to your Martial Soul Mountain, I naturally have no interest in it. Farewell." The Grand Prime smiled before clasping his fist and vanishing. He had already left. With the departure of the old man, the senses of the soul that lingered above the Gloomwater sect all retreated as well. Everyone understood that since the people of the Martial Soul Mountain had come, there was no need for any suspense about what would happen next. Han Zong arrived before Jianqin. He saw Jianqin's wounds with a single glance and immediately showed concern. He asked, "Brother Jianqin, are you fine?" "Thank you for your concern, Brother Han Zong. My wounds are fine," said Jianqin. Chapter 25-26. Aoyama seemed to be around the same age as Jianqin. He wore simple, azure robes and possessed quite the bearing. However, compared to before, he was clearly much more composed now. When Jianqin met Aoyama for the first time in the world of Moon and Star in the Radiant Saint Hall, Aoyama was still a divine king, but now he had reached the Primordial Realm. He had become a Primordial Realm expert. Aoyama is right, Brother Jianqin. You have to understand that we, the people of the Martial Soul lineage, are all brothers of the same family. Even if we don't share our joys and sorrows, we definitely share our joys and sorrows. The matters of a single person are the matters of all the brothers of the Martial Soul lineage. Since you have grievances with the Gloomwater sect, our martial soul lineage has grievances with the Gloomwater sect as well. You should have called us before you destroyed the Gloomwater sect, Hanzong said. He did not show any arrogance or demeanor as an expert when he faced Jianqin. All he showed was deep brotherly affection. He patted Jianqin's shoulder and said, "And the strength of the Gloomwater sect really is nothing to our martial soul mountain. Apart from the elder of mountains and seas, the others are not worth mentioning at all." Hanzang's words were filled with disdain towards the Gloomwater sect. Although the Gloomwater sect was a peak sect on the Aqua Plane, Hanzong did not take it seriously at all. Jianqin's heart warmed up when he heard Aoyama and Hanzang's words. He could clearly sense that Aoyama and Hanzong truly treated him as a brother of their own. They did not have any selfish motives at all. Moreover, when he was trapped on the desolate plain last time, the 7 successors of the martial soul lineage had stood forward. They did not fear all the peak experts present, ignoring the consequences and standing up for him forcefully, stopping all the peak experts present. This touched Jianqin's heart deeply. Along the way, he had seen too much intrigue and too much fratricidal fighting. The successors of the martial soul lineage did not know him at all, yet they treated him with sincerity just because he possessed martial soul force. They treated him as one of their own, without any defense or caution. This touched Jianqin deeply. "Brother Jianqin, come to the martial soul mountain with us. The martial soul mountain is our home." In the end, Hanzong invited Jianqin sincerely. Jianqin hesitated. The records regarding martial soul force on the martial soul mountain were things he desired greatly. However, he did not forget about his true identity either. He always worried about whether he would drag down the martial soul lineage in the future. "Jianqin, you really should pay a visit to the martial soul mountain. There's something you need on the martial soul mountain. If you can use your martial soul force in this battle, it might be much easier." Su Ran added when she saw how Jianqin hesitated. She had heard about the power of martial soul force long ago. "Brother Jianqin, we're both at the primordial realm. Your current battle prowess might have surpassed mine, but you're nowhere close to me when it comes to using martial soul force. Let's go. You really should go to the martial soul mountain and properly cultivate." Aoyama chuckled at Jianqin as well. After a while of hesitation, Jianqin agreed to Hanzong and Aoyama's invitation in the end. After giving Su Ran some healing pills, he bid farewell to her and made his way to the martial soul mountain that had descended on the Aqua Plane. The divine hall in the Gloomwater sect had been personally suppressed by Hanzong. It had shrunk to the size of a fist and rested in Hanzang's hand obediently. There was originally a hell spring deep beneath the Gloomwater sect. The hell water came from the hell spring. However, the hell spring was a wondrous place formed from the unique geography of the Aqua Plane over countless years. It was impossible to take it away. Moreover, a hell spring would take 1,000,000 years to produce a single droplet of hell water. As a result, Jianqin could only give up on the hell spring beneath the Gloomwater sect. Jianqin had already made his way to the martial soul mountain under Hanzong and Aoyama's lead in outer space. As soon as he set foot on the martial soul mountain, Jianqin discovered that the colossal martial soul mountain was not tangible. The entire mountain was constructed from a wondrous energy. The energy was so tremendous that it was enough to shake up the surroundings in Jianqin's eyes. The martial soul mountain we live in is an extremely wondrous place. As the martial soul mountain is just too powerful, we can't control it completely with our strength, so we can't move the martial soul mountain. We can only control a small portion of the mountain soul's power through a secret technique passed down by our seniors. As a result, what you see right now is not the true martial soul mountain. However, the mountain soul of the martial soul mountain is connected to the martial soul mountain no matter where it is. Through the mountain soul's power, we can return to the martial soul mountain in a single instance, no matter how far away we are. Hanzong explained to Jianqin. Afterwards, he brought Jianqin before the 5 other people on the mountain soul and introduced them to Jianqin one by one. After exchanging pleasantries, Jianqin gained a simple understanding of the successors of the martial soul lineage. Among the 7 of them, there were 3 peak chaotic primes. Aside from Hunzong, the other 2 peak chaotic primes were Chu Jian and Yu Chao. However, Hunzong was the most powerful out of the 3 of them. After him was Yun Ziding and Su Qi. Yun Ziding seemed to be in his 30s. He seemed gentle and refined like a scholar. He was a 5th heavenly layer chaotic prime. As for Su Qi, she was a beautiful young woman in her 20s. She was tall and slender. She was extremely attractive to men. She was a 3rd heavenly layer chaotic prime. The final 2 people were by Rafeng and Aoyama. The 2 of them were the 2 with the lowest cultivation out of the 7 successors of the martial soul lineage. They were both infinite primes. However, if Jianqin was included, the martial soul lineage possessed 3 infinite primes. However, Bai Rafeng had already become a 9th heavenly layer infinite prime. He was only a step away from chaotic prime. There were a total of 5 chaotic primes and 3 infinite primes among the 8 successors of the martial soul lineage. Junior Jianqin, finding you really wasn't easy. Ever since you left the desolate plain silently, the 7 of us used the power of the martial soul mountain to use a secret technique to find your whereabouts. But we found nothing in the end, Jianqin said with a smile. The only woman of the martial soul lineage, Su Qi, studied Jianqin as she spoke in a pleasant voice. Junior Jianqin, can you tell me how you fell out with the Gloomwater sect? Jianqin became gloomy when he heard that. He said sorrowfully, the elder of mountains and seas of the Gloomwater sect killed my close friend. Even though he had already destroyed the Gloomwater sect, Jianqin was unable to erase the pain in his heart. As soon as he thought about Keia's death, his heart ached. The elder of mountains and seas clearly knows you're a member of our martial soul lineage, yet he still hunted you down. Since that's the case, we can't spare a single person from the Gloomwater sect. We have to show the people of the Saints' world that our martial soul lineage isn't a pushover. Please wait for a moment. I'll be right back. With that, Su Qi vanished. She had already left the martial soul mountain and made her way to the aquaplane. Chapter 25-27. Hunzong and Yu Chao nodded in agreement. They said nothing more. The 3 greatest experts of the martial soul lineage were peak chaotic primes. When they first met Jianqin, they stood up for Jianqin without any selfishness. They truly treated Jianqin as a brother. There was no difference in status or status at all. Jianqin saw this and gained a whole new level of respect for the successors of the martial soul lineage. Jianqin became even more eager for the martial soul mountain. Since they've treated me like this, there's even less reason for me to drag down the martial soul mountain, thought Jianqin. He had already made up his mind to not stay on the martial soul mountain for too long. Once he obtained the secret technique and cultivation method for martial soul force, he would leave the martial soul mountain. He did not want to have too many connections with the martial soul mountain. If his identity was exposed in the future, he would bring trouble to the martial soul mountain. At this moment, the 5th successor of the martial soul mountain, Su Qi, returned. She held a whip in her hand, and a total of 20 corpses were tied to it. Even though these people were already dead, they still gave off a faint pressure. Their blood pulsed with very powerful energy. Clearly, they were all primordial realm experts. Jianqin glanced over and discovered in surprise that the corpses all belonged to the elders of the Yushui sect who had fled. I've killed all the elders of the Gloomwater sect who remained on the aquaplane. Junior Jianqin, just treat this as a gift from me. With a tremble of Su Qi's hand, the whip vanished. The 20 corpses were placed before Jianqin. Jianqin stared at the corpses blankly. He found it very hard to believe. Although it would be a piece of cake for Su Chi to kill these infinite primes with her strength, these infinite primes were scattered across the aquaplane. Once they purposefully hid themselves, finding them would be extremely difficult. This was because there were many infinite primes on any plane. Even if they were discovered, identifying whether they were from the Gloomwater sect or not would not be easy. However, Su Chi was actually able to accurately find all of them in such a short period of time. This made Jianqin extremely shocked. In an instant, Jianqin looked at Su Chi differently. She was definitely a decisive and ruthless woman. Brother Jianqin, finding all the primordial realm experts of the Gloomwater sect on the aqua plane might be a little difficult for us. But it's extremely easy for Su Chi because she knows a similar secret technique, explained Hunzong. However, Su Chi giggled. There's not a single primordial realm expert left in the Gloomwater sect. As long as the primordial realm experts die, the Gloomwater sect is done for. As for the godhood disciples, just let them fend for themselves. Su Chi was not someone who would willfully slaughter the innocent. She only targeted the primordial realm experts. She did not take the weaker disciples seriously. Jianqin immediately clasped his fist and thanked her. Originally, he only wanted to wipe out the peak forces of the Gloomwater sect. He never wanted to touch the weaker disciples who knew nothing, so he naturally agreed with Su Chi's actions. Afterwards, Jianqin stowed away the corpses of the infinite primes. Under Su Chi's insistence, she left their space rings to Jianqin as a greeting gift. The martial soul mountain left the aquaplane. Jianqin felt the world around him spin as if time had flowed in reverse. In just a few seconds, he discovered in surprise that he was no longer standing on the illusionary mountain soul. Instead, he was standing on solid ground. He looked over and discovered that the martial soul mountain remained the same as before. The only difference was that the colossal martial soul mountain was no longer illusionary. It was real. In just a few seconds, he seemed to have crossed an extremely great distance. He could no longer see the aquaplane anymore. He had appeared in a completely foreign region of space. The martial soul mountain drifted through the sea of stars all by itself. This is the true martial soul mountain, the home that only belongs to our martial soul lineage. Aoyama explained the situation of the martial soul mountain to Jianqin in detail. With Aoyama's explanation, Jianqin gained a clearer understanding of the martial soul mountain. No one in the saints' world knew the origins of the martial soul mountain because it had existed for far, far too long. It was so long that it had surpassed the lifespan of any grand exalt in the saints' world. Although the martial soul mountain was a mountain, it was also an extremely powerful god artifact. It was where the martial soul lineage resided. It was the final barrier that protected the martial soul lineage. It could also be referred to as the origin of the martial soul lineage, the ancestral ground, etc. This was because the martial soul mountain possessed a lot of knowledge and cultivation methods regarding martial soul force. They had all been left behind by the past seniors of the martial soul lineage, so they possessed an extremely tremendous amount of information. The existence of this knowledge and cultivation method allowed any person who possessed martial soul force to rapidly grow once they set foot on the martial soul mountain. They would become experts, one generation after another. Jianqin, don't underestimate the martial soul mountain. As long as we're on the martial soul mountain, there's only a handful of peak experts in the entire saints world who can threaten us, Aoyama said proudly. Jianqin studied the martial soul mountain. As he learnt more and more about the martial soul mountain, his reverence for the martial soul mountain became heavier. Since the martial soul mountain is so powerful, it should have its own consciousness, right? Or should I call it the artifact spirit? Aoyama did not answer immediately. Instead, he sank into his thoughts. A while later, he continued, all of us have thought of that in the past because the martial soul mountain is so powerful. If it's a god artifact, it should have the artifact spirit. Even if it's not a god artifact, it should have its own consciousness. However, we've never discovered that the martial soul mountain has its own consciousness. After all these years, we've only seen it as an inanimate object that possesses great power. Then what's the matter with the mountain soul? Isn't it the soul of the martial soul mountain? Jianchen asked curiously. The so-called mountain soul is actually just a small portion of the power we've mobilized from the martial soul mountain through a secret technique. It can assist us in battle. Right now, we don't have the ability to control the martial soul mountain to deviate from its path and go anywhere in the saint's world. As a result, whenever we go out to fight, we'll mobilize a small portion of the martial soul mountain's power when we're not powerful enough. Not only can it increase our battle prowess, but it can also be used as an escape route. The 8 of them walked side by side on the martial soul mountain. They did not have a hierarchy. They conversed as they made their way to the peak of the martial soul mountain. Very soon, they arrived at the highest point of the martial soul mountain. The 8 of them stopped outside a cave. Jianchen, this is the sacred land of our martial soul lineage, said Hanzong. Hanzong said. He stared at the cave as undisguised admiration filled his face. P.S. Recently, many readers have been complaining about not being able to see the new chapters no matter how many times they open the web page. It's very difficult to wait for the new chapters. In reality, whenever Xiaoyao released a new chapter, he would notify them on his official WeChat account. At the same time, there would be a link to the original chapter on his WeChat account. Moreover, there are some readers who follow the chaotic sword god on other platforms. In the end, some platforms were always out of sync for 10 days to half a month. Other readers had already seen the latest updates every day, but some readers were still stuck at the updates from 10 days to half a month ago. As a result, in order for you to know about the new chapters as soon as possible, please follow Xiaoyao's official WeChat account, XingXingXiao110. Pinyin was the pen name of Xiaoyao, Xinqing. It also had a phone number for the police, or it could be found by searching for Xinqing Xiaoyao on the official WeChat account. Chapter 25-28. It was not just Hanzong. Even Chu Jian, Yu Chao, Yun Ziding, Su Qi, by Rafeng and Aoyama became extremely solemn when they arrived before the cavern. They were filled with respect. Jianchen's heart skipped a beat when he sensed their changes. After a moment of thought, he looked at the cavern as well. The light in his eyes flickered as he sank into his thoughts. The martial soul lineage has always been sparsely populated. Even during the most glorious and most resplendent period recorded in the ancient records, we only had 9 people. As a result, to our martial soul lineage, no matter what time it is, gaining another senior or junior is an extremely important matter to our martial soul lineage. Today, our martial soul lineage welcomes an 8th brother. Even in the long history of our martial soul lineage, it's extremely rare for 8 brothers to exist at the same time. Moreover, according to the ancient records, our martial soul lineage has always maintained 5 or 6 successors in the past. There haven't been many instances of 7 successors. However, once 8 successors appear, it'll herald a new glorious period for our martial soul lineage. Hanzong suddenly became excited when he reached there. He glanced past everyone as undisguised excitement filled his face. He said excitedly, "Now there are finally 8 successors of our martial soul lineage. This means that in the near future, our martial soul lineage will stand proudly in the saint's world. It will surpass the current situation and become even more resplendent." Yeah, 8, we finally gained 8. I've been waiting for this day for far too long, Chu Jian said happily as well. He was filled with anticipation for the future of the martial soul lineage. Yu Chao, by Ziding, Su Qi, by Rafeng and Aoyama smiled as well. They looked forward to the future. Among them, only Jianchen was left scratching his head. He looked at them in doubt and asked in confusion, "I don't quite understand. Can the addition of a single successor affect the future of the martial soul lineage?" One had to know that the strength of a force did not depend on the number of people. but on the strength of the peak powerhouses. However, our martial soul lineage will never be able to break through to Grand Prime. Even if we have one or two more people, it probably won't affect us much. Hanzong and the others looked at Jianchen with a faint smile. Yu Chao explained, Jianchen, our martial soul lineage isn't as simple as you imagine it to be. Every single disciple of the martial soul lineage represents a strand of fortune for the martial soul lineage. The more people there are, the more fortune there is. Now that 8 of us exist at the same time, it means that our martial soul lineage has unknowingly gathered the fortune of 8 people. This fortune will affect the future of our martial soul lineage unknowingly. Of course, the precondition is that none of us die. Otherwise, once someone dies, it won't just be the luck of the 8 of us. What if there are 9 disciples? Jianchen asked. Suddenly, he discovered that the martial soul lineage seemed to be much more complicated than he had imagined it to be. 9. This time, everyone fell into a period of silence. Their eyes flickered with an indescribable color. It was as if 9 was not just a number, nor was it just a gathering of fortune. Instead, it contained even more profound mysteries. And that time was a glorious era that changed the fate of our martial soul lineage. After a moment of pause, Yu Chao suddenly stared at Jianchen sternly and asked, Jianchen, with Brother Hanzang's cultivation as a 9th heavenly layer chaotic prime, he possesses battle prowess no weaker than a 3rd heavenly layer grand prime. He even possesses the power to fight 4th heavenly layer grand primes. Do you know why that is? Isn't it because of martial soul force and your martial soul array? Jianchen asked. When Hanzong fought against so many experts on the desolate plain in the past, he did not have the time to observe the battle in detail, so he naturally did not know the reason. Martial soul force and the martial soul array are indeed of great assistance, but in reality, that's not enough to fight 3rd heavenly layer grand primes, or even 4th heavenly layer grand primes. The true reason is that even though Brother Hanzang's cultivation remains at the 9th heavenly layer of chaotic prime, his cultivation has already become a grand prime, Yu Chao said sternly. Hearing that, Jianchen's heart shuddered. Cultivation referred to the comprehension of the ways of the world and the level of control over laws, while cultivation referred to the strength of a person's energy. Yu Chao was basically saying that Hanzang's comprehension of the ways of the world was still at chaotic prime, but the power within him had already reached the level of grand primes. Jianchen found this to be unbelievable. This was because all cultivators in the saints' world, regardless of their cultivation, were restricted by their cultivation. If they wanted to break through to the next level, they needed to make a breakthrough in their comprehension of the ways of the world. Only then could their cultivation increase. This was the law of cultivation in the world. It was an order of the world that could not be changed. Even with his chaotic body, he needed to make a breakthrough with the laws of the sword before he could reach the next level. Otherwise, his chaotic body would forever remain at his current level. However, Hanzong had actually defied the order of the world, ignoring the restrictions of cultivation and allowing his cultivation to continue increasing. This left Jianchen extremely shocked. At this moment, Hanzong said, This method of bypassing the restrictions of cultivation and continuing to break through was created countless years ago by a senior when our martial soul lineage had 9 successors. It has been passed down to this day, becoming the greatest scripture of our martial soul lineage. Moreover, the records state that our martial soul lineage was extremely glorious during the era of the 9 successors. We became unprecedentedly powerful, enough to shock the stars and fear the world. We could even stand up to grand exalts. Stand up to grand exalts? Our grand exalts born once our martial soul lineage has 9 successors at the same time? Jianchen was deeply stunned. At that moment, he discovered that his understanding of the martial soul lineage was nowhere near enough. The martial soul lineage seemed to possess far too many secrets that no one knew about. Hanzong shook his head gently and said, That era was far too long ago. Even the grand exalt of ancient paths had never heard of the stories of that era. Now, our martial soul lineage only has a few ancient records that contain a few fragments of information. As for whether any of our seniors reached that supreme level of cultivation, we juniors are unable to verify it. Chapter 25-29. Inside the cave, there was a huge karst cave space, and in this huge space there were many people. The place was densely packed with memorial tablets. The memorial tablets were all forged from a wondrous type of jade. They were snow-white and shone with a faint white light. There were thousands of them. As soon as Jianqin entered the cavern, he was stunned by all the memorial tablets before him. His expression had also become incomparably solemn at this moment. His gaze slowly swept across the other tablets one by one, looking at the completely unfamiliar names on the memorial tablets. He didn't know why, but he felt that there was something wrong. His heart suddenly became incomparably heavy, and a deep sense of grief filled his heart. There was no need for any explanation. He already understood that the memorial tablets before him all belonged to the seniors of the martial soul lineage. Since ancient times, the martial soul lineage had never had more than 9 successors at the same time. As a matter of fact, it was extremely rare for 8 successors to appear at the same time. Most of the time, there would be 5 or 6 successors. However, there were thousands of memorial tablets before him. Jianqin struggled to imagine just how ancient the history of the martial soul lineage was. Han Zong stared at the memorial tablets with a heavy heart. He said sternly, "Every single memorial tablet here represents a senior of our martial soul lineage. After these seniors pass away, the final traces of their birth in this world will be left here for future generations to remember. However, these memorial tablets only represent a portion of the seniors. There are some seniors who did not leave behind their memorial tablets after they passed away. This is because our martial soul lineage has encountered many disasters in the long history of the martial soul lineage. Every time a disaster occurs, it means that all the successors of our martial soul lineage have been wiped out. Not a single one remains. Since all the successors have been wiped out, there's naturally no one to erect memorial tablets for the deceased seniors. Although many of the memorial tablets have been replaced by the successors of the next generation, there are still some seniors whose names are unknown. As a result, the memorial tablets cannot be erected. Some of these memorial tablets have existed for even longer than the current Grand Exalts. However, they're protected by the power of the martial soul mountain. So no matter how much time has passed, the memorial tablets will remain the same. Now, all the secret techniques of our martial soul lineage come from these seniors. As a result, in the hearts of the successors of the martial soul lineage, these seniors are the masters of every single one of us, said Jianqin. Han Zong looked at Jianqin, and he became extremely stern. He said, "Jianqin, please pay respects to Master with us." With that, Han Zong knelt down first, kowtowing towards the memorial tablets. Chu Jian, Yu Chao, Yun Ziding, Su Qi, Bai Rafeng, and Oima also knelt down one by one, their expressions full of respect. The cultivation methods they practiced were all left behind by the owners of the memorial tablets when they were alive. Many of the precious cultivation resources were also left behind by the owners of the memorial tablets when they were alive. They all viewed these seniors as their masters. It was only right for a disciple to kowtow to their masters. Jianqin stared at the memorial tablets deeply and slowly knelt down as well, performing the ceremony. Not only was he a member of the martial soul lineage, but he was also about to practice the cultivation methods and various secret techniques left behind by these seniors. As a result, he recognized these masters who had passed away long ago. It was also from this moment onwards that Jianqin formally became the 8th successor of the martial soul lineage. He referred to Han Zong and the others as senior and junior brothers. These spirit tablets belonged to their common master. After performing the ceremony, Jianqin arrived on one side of the cave under Han Zhang's lead. He entered a hidden tunnel. The tunnel twisted downwards. After who knows how long, they arrived in a huge cavern in the end. The cavern was empty. Only the walls and the surroundings were engraved with various simple diagrams and inscriptions. Every single diagram and inscription possessed the charm of the ways, as if the profound laws of the heavens were evolving. This is the true core of our martial soul lineage. All the legacies of our martial soul lineage are engraved on the surrounding walls. Every rune and pattern on the stone wall represented the inherited cultivation methods, inherited battle skills, and all kinds of cultivation experiences left behind by the ancestors. They condense all the information into a single point using a secret technique unique to our martial soul lineage, forming imprints of the ways. They are passed down generation after generation to benefit our juniors. These imprints of the ways are protected by the power of the martial soul mountain, so they never disperse no matter how long time passes. As long as the martial soul mountain exists, these imprints of the ways will never disperse. Eternal imprints. Jianqin stared at the many diagrams and inscriptions on the walls as his eyes shone. 8th Junior. These imprints contain many introductions to martial soul force and how to use it. It's your first time on the martial soul mountain, so you need to understand this properly. You can stay here and cultivate. Once you understand martial soul force completely, I'll take you to where we collect martial soul stones, Han Zhang said to Jianqin. Martial soul stones? Jianqin became curious when he heard about martial soul stones. Ha ha ha! 8th Junior Martial Soul Rock is a special product of the Martial Soul Mountain. Across the entire Saints world, there's only one Martial Soul Rock. Aside from our Martial Soul Mountain, there's nowhere else that can find Martial Soul Stones. If we want Martial Soul Force to grow rapidly, we need Martial Soul Stones. However, 8th Junior's understanding of Martial Soul Force is just too shallow right now, and your usage of Martial Soul Force is nowhere near enough. As a result, it's not time for you to collect Martial Soul Stones yet. You can only cultivate here. Aoyama chuckled from beside Jianqin. All right, let's go out first. Let's let 8th Junior cultivate here. 8th Junior, don't worry about the Divine Hall of the Gloomwater sect for now. Once your cultivation of Martial Soul Force reaches a certain level, you can use the stubborn artifact Spirit of the Divine Hall to test your Martial Soul Force. Han Zhang and the others left, leaving only Jianqin in the huge cavern. Jianqin was unable to contain his excitement as he looked at the ancient imprints engraved in the surroundings and sensed the power of ways within them. Being unable to grow or cultivate Martial Soul Force had always been his greatest regret. Now that he had finally arrived at the sacred land of legacies for Martial Soul Force, he was extremely excited as he could view the many legacies of Martial Soul Force without any conditions. Sucking in a deep breath, Jianqin slowly calmed himself down. After a moment of hesitation, he made his way to the center of the cavern and sat down. He began to look at the ancient diagrams and inscriptions engraved on the walls. Han Zhang had already explained to Jianqin in detail where the methods of cultivation were, where the secret techniques were, and where the experiences of predecessors were. However, Jianqin's usage and understanding of Martial Soul Force remained at a rudimentary level. As a matter of fact, he had not even grasped the basics, so the inscriptions he was looking at explained the basics of Martial Soul Force. In Jianqin's eyes, the ancient inscriptions that explained the basics of Martial Soul Force gradually blurred. At that moment, the entire inscriptions seemed to become a space in his eyes, a world. The world contained a tremendous amount of knowledge and memories. Chapter 2530. Jianqin's mind immediately shuddered. He had already lost his sense of the outside world. He had forgotten about time and himself. His entire consciousness was submerged in the tremendous flood of information as he did his best to accept and digest it. The information recorded some basic knowledge about Martial Soul Force. In particular, there was an extremely detailed introduction to the basics of martial soul force. Jianqin had never come into contact with this information before. After all, the amount of time he had spent cultivating was just far too short. In such a short amount of time, he had spent most of his time comprehending other laws, so he had spent extremely little time on martial soul force. As a result, his understanding of martial soul force could be said to have only scratched the surface. As a matter of fact, he had not even scratched the surface. Now that Jianqin had obtained a tremendous amount of knowledge regarding martial soul force from the sacred grounds of the martial soul mountain, he was immediately enlightened. His understanding of martial soul force deepened. So this is martial soul force. 3 days later, Jianqin slowly opened his eyes. He had already absorbed all the information recorded in the first inscription he saw. At that moment, he finally gained a true understanding of martial soul force. So the martial soul force I used before couldn't be considered as true martial soul force. True martial soul force still needs to be refined from the original foundation, Jianqin thought. Only after refining can it be called true martial soul force. It will make martial soul force even more powerful, thought Jianqin. Afterwards, he looked at the second inscription and studied it carefully again. He understood that what he needed to do right now was not to increase martial soul force immediately. Instead, he needed to use this opportunity to absorb as much information as possible. Whether it be cultivation methods, secret techniques, or the knowledge left behind by predecessors, they were all things he wanted to understand right now. This was because these legacies could only be obtained on the martial soul mountain. They could not be taken away. In the following period of time, Jianqin remained in the sacred grounds of the martial soul mountain, absorbing the information recorded in the legacy imprints one after another. Not only did he obtain many cultivation methods for martial soul force from the legacy imprints, but he even obtained some secret techniques and abilities as well. The cultivation methods varied in quality. The only thing that Jianqin found to be a flaw was that all the cultivation methods could only reach peak chaotic prime. Members of the martial soul lineage will never be able to break through to grand prime. The highest they can reach is peak chaotic prime. Since none of the past seniors have been able to reach grand prime, there's naturally no grand prime cultivation method. Although the martial soul lineage has produced 9 successors once in history, creating a path to grand prime that allowed them to bypass the limits of cultivation and reach grand prime. That's only because their cultivation has reached grand prime. Their comprehension and martial soul force remain unbreakable. My chaotic body is only equivalent to grand prime at great perfection. Throughout history, no one has ever reached great perfection with the chaotic body. In other words, cultivators of the chaotic body will never be able to break through to immortal exalt. It's the same with my martial soul force. Is there a connection between the two? Jianqin frowned as he sank into his thoughts. Martial soul force can't even reach grand prime. Yet the hallowed Saint Masters of the Radiant Saint Hall have a chance of becoming grand exalts. Once the Radiant Saint Hall gives birth to a grand exalt, how will the martial soul lineage survive? That's just far too unfair. Though the grand exalt's cultivation method from the Tower of Radiance is in my hands. I wonder if I can find the reason why the martial soul lineage can't break through to grand prime through the method of the exalt, Jianqin thought. He immediately closed his eyes as soon as he thought of that. The method of the exalted saint was something Jianqin had extracted from the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. Not only did the imprint contain the method of the exalted saint, but it also contained many ancient abilities and secret techniques. However, Jianqin was unable to obtain the complete legacy with the appearance of Gong Sunji, the descendant of the Grand Exalt. In the end, Gong Sunji obtained all the abilities and secret techniques in the Grand Exalt's imprint. In the depths of Jianqin's sea of consciousness, the method of the Exalt was sealed away in the form of a ball of memories. Jinshin's consciousness immediately fused with the ball of memories and began to absorb the information within. Immediately, the memories of the method of the exalted saint began to shrink at a visible rate. The detailed cultivation method of the exalted saint was gradually imprinted in his head. However, Jinshin's expression gradually became strange as he learnt more about the method of the exalt. The strangeness turned into shock very soon. The method of the exalted saint is actually a cultivation method for martial soul force. How is this possible? Jinshin could no longer focus on absorbing the memories of the method of the exalted saint. Suddenly his eyes snapped open. Shock filled his face as his heart churned. The method of the exalt saint was actually a cultivation method for martial soul force. This completely overturned Jinshin's understanding of the Radiant Saint Hall. Don't tell me that the Grand Exalt that appeared in the history of the Radiant Saint Hall was actually a member of the martial soul lineage. At that moment, Jinshin felt like his head was in a mess. There were far too many things that he could not understand. Members of the martial soul lineage could never break through to Grand Prime. Since the Grand Exalt that appeared in the history of the Radiant Saint Hall was a member of the martial soul lineage, how did he become a Grand Exalt? Moreover, the appearance of the Grand Exalt was not the age when the martial soul lineage had 9 successors like Hunzong had described. This was because many details pointed to 2 different eras. Since the Grand Exalt of the history of the Radiant Saint Hall was a member of the martial soul lineage, why did the Radiant Saint Hall become enemies with the martial soul lineage? And from the cultivation method, breaking through to Grand Prime isn't as difficult as I imagined it to be. If that's the case, why can't members of the martial soul lineage become Grand Primes? If it's because of the cultivation method, there have been so many outstanding seniors in the history of the martial soul lineage. As a matter of fact, there were even 9 successors who appeared at the same time. It was a glorious era where fortune gathered. No matter how difficult or wondrous the cultivation method was, it would have been created long ago. Or is there another reason why the martial soul lineage can't break through to Grand Prime? If that's really the case, doesn't that mean I can't break through even with the Grand Exalt's cultivation method? Jinshin left the sacred grounds with such doubts and doubts. He found Hunzong on the martial soul mountain. 8th Junior, you didn't stay in the sacred grounds and have come to me instead. Have you encountered some problems with cultivation? Hunzong smiled amiably as soon as he saw Jinshin. Hunzong was the most senior person on the martial soul mountain. He was the first senior brother of the martial soul lineage, followed by Chu Jian and Yu Chao. Jinshin was the youngest. First senior brother, there's something I don't understand. Is it because of the cultivation method that our martial soul lineage can't break through to Grand Prime? Jinshin asked his doubts. Chapter 2531. Then may I ask what's stopping us from breaking through? Jinshin asked. He clearly cared about his future very much. Hunzang's expression became rather mixed. He sighed gently and stood up. He made his way to the edge of a cliff 100 meters away and stood there with his arms behind his back. He gazed at the hazy galaxy outside the martial soul mountain and only said after a while of thought, the main culprit preventing us from breaking through to Grand Prime is the laws of this world. The laws of the world. The laws of the world? Jinshin was taken aback. Clearly he was surprised by this. That's right. It's the supreme laws of the world. The restrictions of the supreme laws have left the past seniors of our martial soul lineage helpless. This is because under the restrictions of the supreme laws, whenever you try to break through, you'll be suppressed by a mysterious and terrifying power. Before this power, no matter how powerful you are, you won't be able to resist. Deep fear appeared on Hunzang's face. He continued, This mysterious power is far more powerful than any of us combined. Even with my current strength, I feel like I'm even more insignificant than an amp before it. Jinshin's heart skipped a beat. Han Zhang's description made him think of the time when the Holy Emperor was unable to reach the origin realm on the Tianyuan continent. Although the origin energy of the Tianyuan continent had drained away due to the Yinyang Saint Rock back then, there was still a chance for some unprecedented geniuses to reach the origin realm. For example, the Path Lord of Carnal Desires. In reality, origin energy was not the only reason why the Holy Emperor could not break through to the origin realm. There was another extremely important reason, which was the formation Protector Shui had cast down in that world. It was this formation that prevented the Holy Emperor from reaching the origin realm, while the Path Lord of Carnal Desires tried to break through forcefully. In the end, he died in the formation. Did something similar happen to the martial soul lineage when they could not break through to the origin realm? Is it possible that some supreme expert has cast a curse, altering the laws of the world to target our martial soul lineage? Jianqin asked cautiously. A supreme being of a world was in existence whose body had transformed into the great Tao. They themselves represented the heavenly Tao. If there was really such an expert taking action, it wouldn't be difficult to achieve this step. Han Zhang shook his head. Many of our seniors suspected this possibility in the past, but they all rejected it in the end. This is because in the generation before us, there was a senior who asked one of the 7 grand exalts, Senior Gu Dao, in hopes of finding a way to get out of it. However, even Senior Gu Dao, who was so knowledgeable and well-versed in the past and present, failed to discover any flaws. In fact, there were even seniors who attempted to make breakthroughs before Senior Gu Dao. However, the mysterious power that hindered us was something that not even Senior Gu Dao could detect. Jianqin was greatly shocked. The grand exalt of the ancient paths was in existence who had transformed into the great Tao. Such a figure could influence the order of the world with just his will. He was a true sovereign of a world. However, even such a terrifying figure was unable to do anything about it. This left him extremely shocked. At the same time, Jianqin understood that something unknown must have happened after the death of the Grand Exalt of the Radiant Saint Hall, which was why the martial soul lineage could not break through to Grand Prime. This was because Jianqin was extremely certain that the Grand Exalt, the master of the Tower of Radiance, was a member of the martial soul lineage through the method of the Exalted Saint. After thinking about it, Jianqin was in no hurry to tell Han Zhang the secret of the method of the Exalted Saint. This was because it was just too shocking. He planned on revealing it to them after a while. It's a pity that I still can't pass on the method of the Exalted Saint, or I could keep some of it, thought Jianqin. Grand Exalt's cultivation methods involved the most profound mysteries of the world. The entire cultivation method was not recorded with words. Instead, it was a memory inheritance, a mental inheritance. With his current strength, he did not have the ability to engrave the Grand Exalt's cultivation method. In reality, the legacies of some Grand Primes or even chaotic primes had already surpassed the realm of written records. They were either passed on through mental imprints or passed on through inscriptions or diagrams of various shapes. All of these, they involved the mysteries of the world. Without sufficient cultivation, it was impossible to achieve. After bidding farewell to Han Zhang, Jianqin returned to the sacred grounds of the martial Soul Mountain alone. This time, he did not look at the cultivation method left behind because he already had a Grand Exalt's cultivation method. He directly looked at the notes on cultivation left behind by his predecessors, as well as the abilities, secret techniques, and so on. These insights on cultivation have enlightened me greatly. Originally, I had no experience in cultivating martial soul force, but after looking through the insights left behind by the seniors, it has broadened my horizons quite a lot. Jianqin forgot about food and sleep. He stayed in the sacred grounds by himself, absorbing the various insights and comprehensions left behind by the seniors in an unbearable thirst. At the same time, in a small city on the distant aquaplane, a young girl sat cross-legged on the ground and cultivated. She held a few mid-grade divine crystals in her hands. As she cultivated, The energy within the mid-grade divine crystals constantly surged into her body, strengthening the girl's cultivation at all times. The girl's talent was clearly extremely great. Even though she was only a saint ruler right now, her rate of absorption was no slower than some Origin realm experts. It might even surpass them. Because of that, with the assistance of the divine crystals, the speed at which the girl's cultivation increased was so fast that it was flabbergasting. The girl was Fong Jing, In the past, not only had Fong Jing, grandfather recovered from his wounds with Genshin's assistance, but his cultivation had also skyrocketed. As soon as he woke up, he left Scarlet Water City with Fong Jing, settling down in this small city. Fong Jing did not go out to sell maps either. Instead, she used the resources Genshin had left to her and began to work hard on cultivation, increasing her strength. Her cultivation increased at an unbelievable rate. She did not face any bottlenecks at all from Heaven Saint Master to Saint Ruler. Her path was basically unobstructed. She was now a 9th heavenly layer Saint Ruler. At this moment, Fong Jing's presence swelled. Her energy reached a new level in a single instance. At that moment, she broke through again, reaching the level of Holy Emperor. However, it was also at this moment that her body trembled violently. A mysterious door seemed to open in the depths of her memories, and a tremendous amount of memories immediately surged out. Ever since this memory appeared, Fong Jing's aura and even her entire demeanor quietly changed, causing her to become more and more unfamiliar. Only after sitting there for 3 whole days did Fong Jing open her eyes. The moment she opened her eyes, an invisible pressure seemed to seep out. It carried an extremely profound profundity of the way as it shot out, causing the space before her to distort violently. As for the small wooden hut she used for cultivation, it turned into a pile of ashes and scattered with the wind. Immediately, Fong Jing was exposed to the outside world. Fortunately, the place where she lived was an extremely remote place in this small city. There was no one around, so she didn't attract anyone's attention. Chapter 2532. Soon after, she looked at her physical body with a complicated gaze. She was silent for a moment before her gaze landed on the wooden hut that had turned into ashes because of her. A trace of hesitation appeared on her face. Although I'm from the saints' world, I can't be heartless in the end. Whatever. Fong Jing murmured. She hovered in the air and extended a slender finger gently. The space in front of her seemed to ripple like a small stone thrown into a calm lake. In the next moment, a mysterious power appeared out of nowhere. The small wooden hut that had been reduced to ashes and scattered with the wind actually recondensed in its original position. In just a short instance, the wooden hut returned to its original state. It was exactly the same as before. Fong Jing walked into the wooden hut. She closed her hand gently, and the origin energy in the surroundings gathered, condensing into a brush and paper in her hand. Fong Jing left a note in the wooden house and left without any reluctance. As soon as she stepped out of the wooden house, her body suddenly disappeared. There were no pulses of energy, no power of laws, and no ripples of space. Fong Jing had just vanished into thin air, leaving behind no traces at all. The Red Flame sect was a rather renowned sect on the Aqua Plane because they possessed a total of 3 infinite primes. They reigned over a region. The demonic Orchid Mountains were a mountain range that the Red Flame sect placed great importance on. Not only was the entire mountain range protected by the formations cast down by the Red Flame sect, but there were also several divine King Realm elders of the Red Flame sect who watched over it all the time. This was because there was a high-grade divine crystal mine below the demonic Orchid Mountains. The disciples of the Red Flame sect mined the mine day and night, providing the Red Flame sect with a large amount of divine crystals every year. It had already become one of the sources of wealth for the Red Flame sect. On this day, a young girl arrived outside the demonic Orchid Mountains. Her feet did not touch the ground, and she arrived silently. She just stood outside the demonic Orchid Mountains and stared at the protective formation up ahead. None of the godhood experts in the demonic Orchid Mountains sensed her arrival, including the divine King Realm elders. This little girl was none other than Fong Jing. However, the current Fong Jing, whether it was her deep gaze or the unfamiliar and cold temperament, was like a completely different person from before. If it wasn't for the fact that her appearance hadn't changed, she would really be mistaken for a different person. Suddenly, Fong Jing began to form hand seals with her hands. As she did so, her body actually became illusionary. In the end, she turned into a gust of wind and drifted towards the demonic Orchid Mountains at a steady pace. The gust of wind that Fong Jing had transformed into directly charged into the protective formation of the demonic Orchid Mountain. However, the formation that had been personally cast down by the ancestor of the demonic Orchid Mountain, which was enough to reach infinite primes, was completely useless before the gust of wind that Fong Jing had transformed into. Fong Jing passed through the formation without alarming it at all and entered the interior of the demonic Orchid Mountains. It's time to hand over the divine crystals. Everyone, hand over the divine crystals you've collected. The sect will reward you with contribution points based on the number and grade of the divine crystals you hand over. A god called out from outside a mine in the demonic Orchid Mountains. Inside the mine, burly, bare-chested cultivators walked out in a line. They all handed over the space rings in their hands that were specially used to store divine crystals. Nearby, 2 overgods from the Red Flame sect enveloped the surroundings with the senses of their souls. They monitored the surroundings and prevented anyone from stashing away divine crystals. The miners were not disciples of the Red Flame sect. Instead, the sect had recruited them at an extremely low price or forcefully captured them from everywhere. They were specially used to mine divine crystals for them. There's still half a month before we hand over all these divine crystals to the sect. However, the amount of high-grade divine crystals we've mined this year is much greater than before. It looks like we'll be able to exceed our quota this year. Once we exceed our quota, the sect will reward us with quite a lot of rewards. The 2 overgods chatted leisurely on a rock with their arms crossed. At this moment, a gentle breeze blew over, causing the clothes and hair of the 2 overgods to ruffle. However, they did not mind at all. This was because winds like this would frequently blow over in the demonic Orchid Mountains, so they had already become accustomed to it. After the breeze passed by the 2 overgods, it directly blew into the depths of the mine. At this moment, there was an endless stream of miners walking out of the mine. Everyone could feel the cool breeze blowing past them, but no one cared about it. In the end, the breeze directly reached the depths of the mine. The wind began to condense, turning into a girl. It was Fong Jing. This high-grade divine crystal mine should be able to recover quite a lot of my strength. Fong Jing looked around. And with a thought, the power of laws descended, shattering the mountain rocks. Large chunks of rock rolled down, blocking the way out. As for Fong Jing, she sat there with her legs crossed and entered a state of cultivation. She directly absorbed the energy of the high-grade divine crystal mine. The sight of her absorbing the energy was extremely shocking. Endless amounts of pure energy condensed into visible bands of light from all directions, gathering towards Fong Jing. As the bands of light increased, they gradually turned into a huge cocoon that enveloped Fong Jing. The entire cocoon was condensed from pure energy. At this moment, the energy within the cocoon was being devoured by Fong Jing like a whale sucking in water. It was absorbed and refined by her, causing her strength to increase rapidly. It was terrifying and shocking. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had already passed. Jianchen had spent 3 years in the sacred grounds of the Martial Soul Mountain to read through all the cultivation notes left behind by his predecessors. Although he had not cultivated martial soul force for very long, he had already accumulated a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge through what his predecessors had left behind. His understanding of martial soul force had reached a whole new level. Across the entire Saints world, or even the entire Immortals world, only the successors of the martial soul lineage could enjoy such a great fortune. This was because all the legacy imprints left behind in the outside world could not be passed on forever. Every single legacy would exhaust the power within the legacy imprint. Once the power was completely exhausted, the legacy imprint would lose its effects. Only the legacy imprints on the martial soul mountain could remain eternal due to the protection and compensation from the mysterious power of the martial soul mountain. As a result, none of the legacies would disperse due to exhaustion. Martial soul force can ignore the obstruction of God artifacts and directly attack the artifact spirit of God artifacts. Only now have I learnt that martial soul force actually has such a wondrous use. Jianqin left the sacred grounds of the martial soul mountain after 3 years and arrived in an open space on the martial soul mountain. When he destroyed the Gloomwater sect, he had discovered the medium quality god artifact Divine Hall from the Yushui sect. It had been placed here. Hanzong and the others had not paid any attention to it. Although the Divine Hall was controlled by the artifact spirit, it had lost the ability to escape after arriving on the martial soul mountain. This was because the martial soul mountain was more powerful than it. Under the suppression of the martial soul mountain's power, it was unable to escape from the range of the martial soul mountain. Jianqin, don't even think about making me yield to you and serve you as my master. It's impossible. The artifact spirit of the Divine Hall resented Jianqin very much. As soon as it saw Jianqin, it immediately called out. Jianqin was unfazed. He arrived before the Divine Hall, and a black light suddenly flashed through his eyes. Martial soul force directly shot out and attacked the Divine Hall. Chapter 25:33. Although Jianqin's strength had not increased at all during his time in the sacred grounds, his understanding of martial soul force had reached a whole new level. At the same time, he finally understood how to use true martial soul force. As a result, although the martial soul force he used remained at the same level as before, its power was completely different from before. It had increased by far, far too much. After sending out a strand of martial soul force, Jianqin stared at the Divine Hall without blinking. He wanted to see the effects. What's this? Martial soul force? Is this the legendary martial soul force? Ha ha ha, you call this martial soul force? Jianqin, your martial soul force isn't even enough to tickle me. You're dreaming if you think you can harm me with martial soul force with your current strength, the artifact spirit laughed aloud. Its voice was filled with provocation and disdain. Come again. Continue. Let's see if you can threaten me at all with your current strength. Jianqin did not become angered at all. Instead, he smiled faintly. He also understood that his martial soul force was still very weak. It was nowhere near enough to harm the artifact spirit of a medium quality god artifact. The main reason he had come this time was to test whether martial soul force could really ignore the defenses of god artifacts and directly harm the artifact spirit, like the legacy imprint had said. Looking at it now, martial soul force did not disappoint him. He was extremely excited. This was because if his opponent possessed a god artifact, it would greatly increase their battle prowess. If his martial soul force became powerful, the advantage of his opponent's god artifact would decrease drastically when he fought in the future. 8th Junior, you should properly increase your martial soul force. If your martial soul force can reach my level, you'll be able to have some fun with the artifact spirit of this Divine Hall. Aoyama walked over from afar. He stared at the Divine Hall and smiled mysteriously. Just like this, Aoyama murmured. In the next moment, Jianqin immediately felt a powerful strand of martial soul force shoot out from Aoyama's forehead, directly stabbing into the Divine Hall. Immediately, the entire Divine Hall trembled gently. Afterwards, the artifact spirit cried out, "If you're bold enough, come in and fight me." What's the point of using martial soul force to launch sneak attacks from outside? A casual strike from me can make him suffer a little. The artifact spirit of this divine hull isn't powerful, but that makes sense. Although it's a medium quality god artifact, it's only at the bottom among medium quality god artifacts. Qing Shan said indifferently. It's time for me to properly increase my martial soul force, said Jianqin. The divine hull before him contained a tremendous amount of resources from the Gloomwater sect, including over a dozen droplets of hell water. He desperately wanted the artifact spirit to submit. This was because once the artifact spirit submitted, he would be able to take everything in the divine hull. However, the artifact spirit was just too stubborn. It refused to accept him. With his current strength, he was unable to forcefully subdue a medium-quality god artifact. Although the chaotic primes of the martial soul lineage could do it, Jianqin had never considered asking for help. Subduing god artifacts required his own strength. Let's go. I'll take you to the place where martial soul stones are collected. Martial soul stones are extremely important to increase your martial soul force. Aoyama left with Jianqin. Before long, Aoyama took Jianqin into a cave. The cave was very deep. There were traces of human excavation in the surroundings, making it seem more like a mine. Very soon, Jianqin arrived at the very bottom of the cave under Aoyama's lead. It was an extremely spacious circular hall. Dazzling, violet crystals covered the walls and the surroundings, shining with dazzling light. It was quite mesmerizing. These are martial soul stones. In the entire Saints world, only our martial soul mountain can produce martial soul stones. The disciples of our martial soul lineage all rely on martial soul stones to increase their martial soul force. That's because martial soul stones contain pure martial soul force. Not only will absorbing the martial soul force within the martial soul stones increase our martial soul force, but it can also recover our martial soul force. If we don't use martial soul stones, it'll be extremely slow to condense martial soul force through our own cultivation. Aoyama looked at the violet crystals embedded in the rock as he explained to Jianqin in detail. Martial soul stones are extremely special. When they fuse with the martial soul mountain, the martial soul force within them won't decrease. However, once they're extracted, the martial soul force will rapidly drain away and return to the martial soul mountain. As a result, martial soul stones can't be stored for long periods of time like divine crystals. Once they're extracted, you need to absorb as much martial soul force as possible before it disappears. Is there no way to take the martial soul stones away? Jianqin asked. Aoyama shook his head. There isn't. There's no way to take the martial soul stones away because, once they leave the martial soul mountain, all the martial soul force within them will drain away and return to the martial soul mountain. As a result, you need to absorb the martial soul stones here. Afterwards, Aoyama warned Jianqin about the areas he needed to pay attention to before patting Jianqin's shoulder. He said, 8th Junior, cultivate here at ease. If there's anything you don't understand, you can come out and ask your seniors. Aoyama left the mine, while Jianqin arrived before the rock face. He condensed sword chi at the tip of his finger and stabbed it into the rock face to extract the martial soul stones. Extracting the martial soul stones was not difficult. Very soon, a fist-sized violet crystal fell to the ground. Jianqin picked up the violet crystal and sensed it silently. As expected, he could sense extremely pure martial soul force within the violet crystal. However, the martial soul force was flowing away at an extremely rapid rate. At this rate, all the martial soul force within the martial soul stone would be drained away in less than half a day, returning to the martial soul mountain. Jianqin did not absorb it immediately. Instead, he thought of various methods to stop the martial soul force from flowing away. However, in the end, he was unable to stop it no matter what he did. He could only watch as the martial soul stone in his hand vanished. It really can't be stored for long periods of time. I can't take it away. Jianchen sighed inside. He gave up on the idea of collecting some martial soul stones. He extracted another martial soul stone before sitting down to cultivate. The martial soul force within the martial soul stone turned into thin ribbons of energy that entered Jianchen's forehead. Jianchen practiced the method of the Exalted Saint and began to formally practice the Grand Exalt's cultivation method. Grand Exalt's cultivation method was a publicly acknowledged supreme legacy in the current world. It was a creation of the world and contained the mysteries of the ways. It was extremely profound and powerful. It was unquestionable. As he practiced the cultivation method, the thin ribbons of energy in the martial soul stone immediately became several times larger. The martial soul force in the martial soul stone immediately flowed away at a faster rate, forming a ribbon of light that connected to Jianchen's forehead. Chapter 2534. The martial soul stone that shone with a violet light rapidly dimmed in Jianchen's hand. The martial soul force within it drained away rapidly. However, Jianchen's martial soul force increased at a rate that was rarely seen in his life. It was so fast that Jianchen was overjoyed. For hours later, the martial soul stone in Jianchen's hand dispersed due to exhaustion. Jianchen opened his eyes at that moment as well. I can only absorb roughly half of the martial soul force within the martial soul stone. The other half will disperse into the surroundings and return to the martial soul mountain. However, even if I can only absorb half of it, it's still enough for me to make an extremely obvious improvement, Jianchen murmured to himself as his eyes shone. It's only been 4 hours, yet I've made an extremely obvious improvement. If I cultivate here for a few years or even longer, I wonder just how much my martial soul force will increase. And as my martial soul force rapidly strengthens, my rate of absorption will become faster and faster. Jianchen was excited. He continued to cultivate in anticipation of the future. Time passed silently. Unknowingly, Jianchen had already cultivated in the mind for over half a year. During that time, he had mined over 1,000 fist-sized martial soul stones. With the assistance of the martial soul stones, his martial soul force increased extremely rapidly. It had already reached godhood. Moreover, only half a year had passed. He still had a lot of time ahead of him. As martial soul force increases, radiant saint force increases as well. After all, martial soul force is a combination of a fighter and a radiant saint master. As a result, radiant saint force is at the same level as martial soul force. However, the increase in martial soul force is restricted by the laws of the hallowed. Is it really impossible to comprehend the laws of the hallowed of our martial soul lineage to Grand Prime? Whatever. I'm still extremely far away from the 9th heavenly layer of chaotic prime anyway. I'll cultivate in peace first. I'll worry about the future in the future. At the same time, in the demonic Orchid Mountains controlled by the Red Flame sect on the distant Aqua Plain, a divine hall that was a supreme quality saint artifact stood at the peak of the demonic Orchid Mountains. 3 elders of the Red Flame sect resided in the divine hall. 2 of them were at mid-divine king, while 1 was at late divine king. The 3 of them guarded the demonic Orchid Mountains all year round, in charge of the safety of the mountain range. The position of an elder and the cultivation of a divine king made them supreme figures in the Red Flame sect. The 3 of them were sent here, so they naturally lived like princes. They spent all their time in seclusion, ignoring the matters of the outside world. They rarely emerged unless something extremely important happened. On this day, an over-god disciple of the Red Flame sect rushed in hurriedly and reported to the 3 elders who were in seclusion. Elders, bad news, bad news. The high-grade divine crystal mine in the depths of the demonic Orchid Mountains is losing a large amount of energy. The divine crystals that should have been high-grade have fallen to mid-grade. There's not a single high-grade divine crystal left in the entire demonic Orchid Mountains now. What did you say? An old voice rang out. A white-robed old man appeared before the attendant. He was stern. The high-grade divine crystal mine was the most precious treasure of the Red Flame sect. It could even be described as the foundation of the sect. It was directly linked to the future of the Red Flame sect, so they could not allow anything to happen to it. A high-grade divine crystal mine has fallen to a mid-grade divine crystal mine. How is that possible? Two more figures appeared behind the old man. The three elders of the Red Flame sect, who were stationed here, had all been alerted. Elders, please go take a look. The divine crystal mine is losing energy faster and faster. If this continues, the mid-grade divine crystals will probably fall to low grade, the attendant said in a panic. Elder Dong, go take a look yourself, the white-robed old man said to a mid-divine king, elder behind him. The divine king, referred to as Elder Dong, nodded and directly left the divine hall. He expanded his powerful senses of the divine king's soul, enveloping the entire demonic orchid mountains and deep underground. The divine crystal mine below the demonic orchid mountains really is losing energy rapidly, but it's all gathering in one place. Elder Dong found the reason very quickly with his divine king's senses of the soul. With a single movement, he made his way to the mine. In a few seconds, he arrived at the very depths of the mine. In the end, he stopped before a stone wall that was as smooth as a mirror. Elder Dong stared at the stone wall for a while before bellowing out, "It's actually a concealment formation. Humph! Which thief is bold enough to steal the divine crystal mine of our Red Flame sect?" Elder Dong directly slashed out with his sword. Boom! With a loud bang, the concealment formation in front of him suddenly exploded. The chaotic world in the mine flew everywhere, revealing the scenery inside. A beautiful woman of 18 sat on the ground and cultivated. She wore extremely cheap, coarse clothes. The pure energy of the high-grade divine crystal mine gathered over from all directions, forming a thick, white mist around the woman. The woman's figure was faintly discernible within the swirling clouds. She seemed to be filled with a celestial aura, as if she was a celestial in the clouds. The woman was Fong Jing. "Who are you? Don't you know that the demonic orchid mountains are the territory of our Red Flame sect? Tell me who you are, or don't blame old man for being rude to you." Elder Dong stared at Fong Jing with a sunken face. Even though he could tell with a single glance that Fong Jing was only a peak god, he did not act rashly. This was because the sight of Fong Jing absorbing energy right now was just too shocking to him. Someone who was only a god was actually able to gather all the energy in the mine. Moreover, she absorbed energy so quickly that even a mid-divine king like him could not compare to her. All of this demonstrated that the woman before him was definitely not a simple figure despite her low cultivation. Fong Jing's eyes remained closed. She pursed her lips gently. How dare a mere Xian immortal of the 9 heavens act so rudely to me? Kneel. As soon as Fong Jing finished speaking, a powerful power of laws descended, turning into an invisible mountain that pressed down on Elder Dong. Elder Dong's face suddenly changed. He became utterly shocked. The power of the laws that had suddenly appeared was like the ocean in his senses. It was vast and boundless, impossible to resist at all. With his cultivation as a mid-divine king, he was as puny as an ant before the laws. He could not put up any resistance at all. Thump! Elder Dong directly knelt on the ground. His knees shattered, creating 2 small pits in the tough rock below him. He stared at Fong Jing in fright. His forehead was covered with cold sweat, and he was utterly terrified. He wanted to beg for mercy, but he discovered that he could no longer make a sound. He did not have the strength to speak at all. I would never kill a mere Xian immortal of the 9 heavens, but unfortunately, you're from the saints' world. Since you're from the saints' world, only death awaits you, said Fong Jing. There was an air of superiority in her tone, as if she was judging a criminal. She coldly pronounced Elder Dong's death sentence. Bang! Elder Dong's body immediately exploded, turning into a bloody mist that rained down. Elder Dong, who was at the mid-divine king realm, didn't even make a sound before his body and soul perished. P.S. Recently, many readers have been complaining that they haven't seen any new chapters, even though they've opened the page many times a day. It's very difficult for them to wait for new chapters. Actually, whenever Xiaoyao released new chapters, he would notify them on his official WeChat account. At the same time, there would be a link to the official version on his WeChat account as well. There are also some readers who follow the chaotic Sword God on other platforms. However, some platforms would not update for half a month at all. Other readers have already seen the new chapters every day, but some readers are still stuck on the chapters from half a month ago. As a result, in order to receive updates as soon as possible and see the new chapters, please follow Xiaoyao's official WeChat account, Xinqing Xiaoyao 110. It was the pseudonym of Xinqing Xiaoyao. There was also a number for the police, or you could directly search for Xinqing Xiaoyao on the official WeChat account. Chapter 2535. After Elder Dong's death, Fang Jing slowly opened her eyes. She stared at Elder Dong's corpse calmly and murmured, "There are 9 heavenly Shen immortals in the demonic Flower Mountains. Now that I've killed one of them, the other 2 will sense it very soon. I can't let them leak the news here, or immortal monarchs will be drawn over. My soul is too weak right now, so the laws I can use are limited. I can't fight immortal monarchs for now." Fang Jing stood up and flew outside. Along the way, many miners and disciples of the Red Flame sect entered and exited the labyrinthine mine. Fang Jing turned into a gust of wind and drifted outside. No one could sense her. She did not attack the regular miners, but whenever she passed by the disciples in the attire of the Red Flame sect, they would all die. In a single instance, several dozen disciples had died in the mine. Their unexpected deaths unsettled all the miners in the mine, causing them to fall into an uproar. At the peak of the demonic Orchid Mountains, the other 2 elders of the Red Flame sect, who guarded the supreme quality, Saint Artifact, Divine Hall, walked out of the Divine Hall together. They stood at the entrance of the Divine Hall and used the senses of their souls to peer into the mine below. "Oh no, Elder Dong is dead." At this moment, the late Divine King Elder's face changed as he cried out. The other Divine King Elder's face became extremely ugly as well. He also cried out, "Several dozen disciples have died for no reason in the mine." The 2 of them looked at each other and could see the seriousness in each other's faces. The late Divine King Elder immediately called out, "Notify the sect!" "It's already too late." At this moment, a woman's voice rang out from nowhere. A gust of wind appeared before the 2 Divine King Elders of the Red Flame sect, and Fang Jing appeared before them silently. "Who are you?" The elder's face changed, and he immediately called out, "You don't have the right to know my name," Fang Jing said coldly. With that, the power of laws that were terrifying to the 2 Divine King Elders suddenly appeared. It turned into an invisible mountain and crushed down on them with devastating power. Bang! With a muffled sound, the 2 Divine King Elders directly exploded. Their souls had been wiped out. Fang Jing's face changed slightly as well. She had become rather pale. This was because she had expended too much of her soul. She extended a finger and collected the space rings of the 2 Divine King Elders. Afterwards, she turned into a gust of wind again and drifted through the demonic Flower Mountains. Immediately, the disciples of the Red Flame sect, who stood guard around the demonic Flower Mountains, collapsed one after another. All of them had been wiped out, but there were no wounds on them at all. Their deaths were rather strange. Before long, all the disciples of the Red Flame sect in the demonic Flower Mountains had died. Only a few miners remained standing there in fear. They had no idea what to do. They wanted to take advantage of the chaos to flee, but the entire demonic Flower Mountains was enveloped by formations, cutting it off from the world. With their strength, it was impossible for them to escape. After killing the disciples of the Red Flame sect, Fang Jing returned to the depths of the mines as a gust of wind. She continued to absorb the energy of the divine crystals. She completely ignored the miners trapped there. The energy of the divine crystals rapidly drained away. As Fang Jing's strength increased, she absorbed the energy faster and faster. As Fang Jing focused on cultivating, the miners trapped in the demonic flower mountains all stopped digging. Instead, they gathered in an empty area outside the mine. They gradually calmed down from their initial fear and uneasiness. This was because they had discovered that the people who had died were all disciples of the Red Flame sect. Not a single one of the miners who did not belong to the Red Flame sect had died. This led them to guess that the mysterious expert probably had grievances with the Red Flame sect and would not harm them. This allowed them to be completely at ease. Fortunately, all of them were sitting cross-legged here and quietly cultivating. When we cultivate, we must remember not to take the energy from the divine crystal mine. We can only absorb the origin power that wanders between the heavens and the earth. The miners warned each other. The energy ripples from the divine crystal mine deep underground grew stronger and stronger. In the end, it was no longer concealed, and everyone could sense it clearly. This allowed them to understand that the mysterious expert who had killed all the disciples of the Red Flame sect had not left. He was still cultivating in the mines. However, no one was bold enough to enter the mines to investigate. A year later, the high-grade divine crystal mine in the demonic flower mountains had been completely drained of energy. The entire mine had dried up. Due to the lack of energy, the formation around the demonic flower mountains automatically shut down and lost its effects. The protective formation has vanished. Let's go. Let's go. At this moment, the miners trapped in the demonic flower mountains suddenly called out. Afterwards, all of them fled outside as quickly as they could. In the blink of an eye, all the miners had fled. Several hours later, several figures flew over from afar and stopped in the air above the demonic flower mountain. There were 4 people in total who had come. They were all divine king cultivators. They all looked down sternly. The miners have disappeared, the formation has shut down, and the 3 elders who watched over this place have all disappeared. Something really has happened to the demonic flower mountains. What happened here? Why can't I sense any pulses of energy from the mine at all? The mine has dried up. How is this possible? The expressions of the 4 elders from the Red Flame sect changed drastically. Disbelief filled their faces. The depletion of the high-grade divine crystal mine was definitely a huge blow to the Red Flame sect. In the next moment, the 4 elders flew towards the mines with panicked expressions. The Red Flame sect could afford to lose 3 elders, and they could afford to lose a year's worth of the mine. However, they could not afford to lose the entire mine. However, just as they were about to approach the mines, powerful strands of sword chi shot out of the mines as 4 silver-white streaks. They pierced the heads of the 4 elders with lightning speed. The 4 Divine King elders were wiped out before they could even react. Fang Jing emerged from the mines emotionlessly. Her current cultivation had reached early Divine King. With a wave of her hand, Fang Jing stowed away the space rings of the 4 Divine King elders. She looked in the direction of the Red Flame sect and murmured, "With the strength of my soul, I can deal with immortal monarchs. There are 3 immortal monarchs in the Red Flame sect, after all. The resources there should be enough for me to recover quite a lot." The mysteries of the Heavenly Heart technique really is wondrous. Whether it's the rate at which I absorb energy or recover cultivation, it's several times faster than other experts, or even over 10 times faster. Fang Jing directly made her way to the Red Flame sect as she murmured to herself. Several days later, the protective formation around the Red Flame sect continued to function as usual. However, rivers of blood had already flowed within the sect. The Red Flame sect, which had over 100,000 disciples, had been wiped out. From the 3 great elders to the weaker origin realm disciples, all of them lay in pools of blood. Fang Jing sat in the central square of the Red Flame sect. Many space rings were piled up before her, as well as a terrifying amount of heavenly resources and cultivation resources. She, on the other hand, was using these cultivation resources to restore her own cultivation. Chapter 2536. Time flew by like an arrow. Unknowingly, 10 years had already passed. 10 years was just the blink of an eye in the saint's world. However, the aquaplane was no longer peaceful during those 10 years. Ever since the silent destruction of the Red Flame sect with 3 infinite primes in the past 10 years, several sects and organizations had been destroyed in various places on the aquaplane as well. Without any exception, the sects that had been destroyed were all ancient organizations with infinite primes. No one knew who the culprit was. Even when a few primordial realm experts used their ability to turn back time, they were unable to see the culprit's appearance. For a moment, all the ancient organizations on the aquaplane panicked. Basically, all the sects were on high alert. Even a few eternal organizations with chaotic primes secretly raised their guard. At the same time, they paid close attention to the entire aquaplane in an attempt to find the culprit's whereabouts. Fang Jing stood in a building in a city in a white dress within an everlasting empire in the central region of the aquaplane. She stared into the distance in a daze. 10 years later, not only had she become more mature than before, but she also had an otherworldly temperament. She was like a fairy who didn't eat the food of mortals. However, it was possible to tell from her cold eyes that there was a cold, killing intent hidden behind her gentle appearance. Just a glance from her was enough to make people shiver. Currently, her cultivation base was already at the late Divine King realm. The further I go, the more difficult it will be to recover. The cultivation resources I need will multiply. Who knows when I'll be able to return to my peak condition in this foreign land. But now, many sects on the aquaplane have already become cautious. I can't stay here any longer. It looks like it's time for me to leave. A hazy figure enveloped by the light of ways sat in the heavenly palace of Bishing on the Prosper Plain. Thousands of laws interwove above his head as the mysteries of the ways evolved. They crossed through time, peering into the past and the future. This person was clearly using a divine ability to perform a divination. As he deduced, the light of the great path that condensed around him instantly boiled. The sound of the great path rumbled like thunder, and the order of the world seemed to be affected and disturbed. It caused the 5 elements of the world around him to be reversed, yin and yang to be in disorder, and the laws of the world to be in chaos. "We finally found the last strand of Gu Dao's soul," said the figure. It was hard to tell if the voice was male or female. He stopped his divination technique, causing the chaotic space around him to gradually calm down. One heart. His voice was like the sound of the heavenly ways. It passed through the various obstructions and reached another place in the heavenly palace of Bishing. With that, the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing, Exen, appeared silently. Her face was filled with respect as she clasped her fist. "Disciple Exen greets Master. May I ask what orders Master has for me?" "Go to the heaven-splitting clan on the 9 Clouds Plain and retrieve the last strand of Gu Dao's soul from the heaven-splitting ancestor," the Nata Grand Exalt said coldly, leaving no room for doubt. The last strand of Senior Gu Dao's soul is actually in the hands of the heaven-splitting ancestor. Exayan was deeply surprised by this outcome, but she clasped her fist soon afterwards. "Yes, Master!" Jian Chen sat on the fortune jade and cultivated in the cave where martial soul stones were mined. Silver-white strands flickered in and out of existence around him. They seemed to revolve around him. The increase in martial soul force was restricted by the laws of the hallowed. His martial soul force had already reached the peak of his current level of cultivation. It was impossible for his martial soul force to continue growing before he made a breakthrough with the laws of the hallowed. Now, he used the fortune jade to comprehend the laws of the hallowed. "It's been 10 years, and my laws of the hallowed have only reached early over God. With this speed, it'll probably take me over 100 years at the very least to comprehend the Divine King's realm, even with the assistance of the Fortune Jade. It'll take me 100 years to reach the Divine King's realm. Who knows when I'll reach the primordial realm? Jianqin opened his eyes as a sliver of helplessness appeared on his face. He had finally found a way to increase his martial soul force quickly after so much difficulty, yet he was restricted by the laws of the hallowed, preventing his martial soul force from advancing any further. He felt extremely regretful. After all, he did not have a golden core for the laws of the hallowed. As a result, the speed at which he comprehended the laws of the hallowed was naturally incomparable to the laws of strength, the laws of fire, and the laws of space. In reality, Jianqin had used less than 10 years to comprehend the laws of the hallowed to such a level. Even with the entire Saints world in perspective, he was probably unprecedented. He was a true, monstrous genius. After all, his comprehension of the laws of the hallowed had come from nothing, slowly progressing step by step. It was unlike the reincarnations of some great experts who would possess the comprehension of their previous life after recovering their memories. As a result, their strength would recover extremely quickly. I wonder what's going on with the Tianyuan family right now. I can't stay on the Martial Soul Mountain for over 100 years. It looks like I can only come here and absorb martial soul stones after my comprehension of the laws of the hallowed increases, Jianqin thought. After making up his mind, Jianqin immediately stood up and left. He arrived before the medium-quality god artifact Divine Hall again. The soul-destroying technique is an offensive secret technique I have grasped. Artifact Spirit, in the past you mocked my martial soul force for only being able to scratch an itch for you. So let me continue scratching that itch for you with the soul-destroying technique. Jianqin said to the Divine Hall before him. With that, he closed his eyes and secretly used the secret technique. The use of secret techniques for martial soul force was completely different from other god-tier battle skills. Some battle skills required the use of both hands to form seals, while the secret techniques for martial soul force could be directly used to control martial soul force in the sea of consciousness. Jianqin had chosen a few secret techniques that were more suitable for him to practice in the sacred grounds. However, he had always been busy with increasing his martial soul force and comprehending the laws of the hallowed, so he never had the time to practice and use the secret techniques. Only now did he finally find an opportunity. Come, come. Do you think I'm afraid of you? With your puny martial soul force, you're only qualified to scratch an itch for me, the artifact spirit said scornfully. Although it said that, it still felt nervous inside. After all, martial soul force was just too wondrous. It could directly break through the obstruction of the Divine Hall and harm its spirit. Now that 10 years had passed, it had no idea just how much Jianqin's martial soul force had increased. Jianqin sat down with his eyes closed. He did his best to control his martial soul force and condense the soul-destroying technique. As this was the first time he was using the technique, even though he knew all the methods and techniques, it was not extremely smooth. He failed several times. After several hours, Jianqin finally condensed the soul-destroying technique. His eyes suddenly snapped open, and they became pitch black. Powerful martial soul force gathered between his eyebrows. However, in the next moment, the martial soul force that had gathered between his eyebrows collapsed and dispersed. He had failed on his first attempt. Ha ha ha! So this is your so-called martial soul-destroying technique. The Divine Temple's artifact spirit, who had been on guard all this while, could not help but laugh out loud when he saw this. Jianqin's expression did not change. Instead, he closed his eyes again and tried to condense the soul-destroying technique again. This time, he used even less time to condense the technique. In just 2 hours, he succeeded. His eyes suddenly snapped open, and they immediately became pitch black. It was as if endless, black mist was surging wildly. It was breathtaking. Chapter 2537. The Divine Hall shook gently. Vaguely, Jianqin seemed to hear a grunt from the artifact spirit. Jianqin could not help but smile. He knew that the soul-destroying technique he possessed was enough to cause some trouble for the artifact spirit. Of course, it would only be trouble. After all, his current martial soul force was only equivalent to an early overgod. If it were not for the fact that his martial soul force could ignore the defenses of the Divine Hall and directly attack the artifact spirit, he would not have been able to do so. He probably would not even be able to scratch an itch for the Divine Hall. After all, the greatest advantage of the artifact spirit of the Divine Hall was that it could use artifacts to fight. As a medium-quality god artifact, infinite primes would not be able to do anything to it. However, once the powerful shell that they relied on lost its function, they would become very weak. Martial soul force just happened to be the bane of the artifact spirit. Artifact spirit, I wonder if scratching an itch is comfortable. Jianqin sat on a rock before the Divine Hall and seemed to be smiling. Humph, it's comfortable, it's comfortable. It's far too comfortable. Jianqin, kid, keep going. Why have you stopped? Is it because you don't have the ability to keep going? The artifact, spirit of the Divine Hall, snorted in provocation. I've only just grasped the soul-destroying technique, so I can't use it as I please. I can use it with a single thought, so I just happen to need some practice. Since you're so eager for me to scratch an itch for you, I'll do as you wish, Jianqin said indifferently. With that, he closed his eyes and condensed the soul-destroying technique again. He can actually use it a second time? Humph, using a secret technique like that will definitely take quite a toll on him. Let's see how many times he can use it. The artifact spirit that hid in the Divine Hall murmured softly. It had already become cautious. Although the soul-destroying technique from before was unable to injure it, its attacking power was enough to affect it somewhat. Once or twice was fine, but if it were to be used a few more times, even if it wouldn't be injured, the feeling would still be unbearable. Afterwards, Jianqin sat before the Divine Hall and used the soul-destroying technique time and time again. As he used it more and more, he gradually became more and more comfortable with condensing the soul-destroying technique. The interval between each use decreased from once every 2 hours to twice every 2 hours, and then 3 times every 2 hours. Whenever Jianqin's soul-destroying technique landed on the artifact spirit, the Divine Hall would tremble gently. At the same time, the trembling would become greater and greater as Jianqin used the soul-destroying technique more and more. Comfortable, so comfortable. This feeling is just too wonderful. I've been alive for millions of years, but I've never experienced such a wonderful feeling. Jianqin, hurry up! The artifact spirit's voice rang out. In reality, its face had already begun to twist as it hid in the Divine Hall. It endured 7 or 8 consecutive attacks from the soul-destroying technique. Every single attack landed on its mind with great precision. Although it was not injured, the feeling was just too horrible. It was like an ordinary person experiencing pain similar to a headache. Although a headache would not harm their soul, it would definitely be horrible. Right now, the artifact spirit was experiencing pain like that. Finally, after using the soul-destroying technique over a dozen times, Jianqin stopped. He had basically run out of martial soul force. The time it takes to condense the soul-destroying technique has already been shortened to 5 minutes. Although it's still quite far from being able to condense it with a thought, it's still quite an improvement. Jianqin stood up and began making his way towards the cave where the martial soul rock was mined. Jianqin, why aren't you continuing? Are you leaving just like that? I still haven't had enough. The artifact spirit's provocative voice rang out from behind. Only when Jianqin completely vanished did the artifact spirit finally let out a long sigh of relief. He's finally gone. If this continued, I would definitely go insane from the torture. Why did I have to encounter this god-damned martial soul force? With the martial soul rock, it was extremely easy for Jianqin to recover martial soul force. He could directly mine it and absorb the martial soul force inside. At the same time, Genshin's rate at absorbing martial soul force had become extremely fast. The next day, his martial soul force had recovered to its peak condition. Afterwards, he left the cave and returned to the rock before the divine hall. He used the artifact spirit to practice. Seeing Genshin, the artifact spirit could not help but launch a verbal attack. It mocked and provoked him. However, Genshin ignored it. He could not be bothered with it. He used the soul-destroying technique as soon as he arrived. Several hours later, Genshin used the soul-destroying technique over a dozen times. He left after running out of martial soul force. He returned to the cave where the martial soul rock was mined to recover. On this day, the rate at which he condensed the soul-destroying technique increased once again. The time he took to condense the soul-destroying technique increased from once to twice. Afterwards, Genshin used the artifact spirit to practice the soul-destroying technique every day. Finally, after a month of practice, he became even more familiar with the soul-destroying technique. He only needed 10 seconds to condense the soul-destroying technique every time. 10 seconds is still too long. I need to reach the level of instantaneous release with a single thought. Only then will I be able to catch them off guard. Genshin was still dissatisfied. He continued to practice diligently. However, the further he progressed, the more difficult it became. After another 3 months, Genshin finally reached the level where he could use the soul-destroying technique freely. He could instantaneously release the soul-destroying technique with a single thought. It was also at this moment that he finally grasped a secret technique for martial soul force. The secret technique could make his attacks with martial soul force even sharper and more powerful. Of course, the artifact spirit of the Divine Hall had been tormented by Genshin in the past few months as well. It felt like he was in purgatory. After living for tens of thousands of years, he truly understood what it was like to live a day like a year and what it was like to live a living hell. Its attitude towards Genshin changed time and time again. In the beginning, it constantly provoked him, mocking him all day long. However, from the second month onwards, it became silent. It would often go days without saying anything. In the final month, the artifact spirit of the Divine Hall seemed to be driven mad from the torture. It stopped being silent and directly began to curse. Now, I can practice the second secret technique. This secret technique is called the heaven-severing technique. The heaven-severing technique is extremely powerful. It's specially used against powerful opponents who are far more powerful than me. However, the heaven-severing technique is extremely draining. It can be regarded as a trump card. Every time I use it, it will consume half of my martial soul force. The more powerful my martial soul force is, the more powerful the heaven-severing technique will be. With first senior brother Hanzong, second senior brother Chu Jian, and third senior brother Yu Chao's martial soul force, they'll probably be able to directly obliterate some weaker grand primes once they use the heaven-severing technique. Chapter 2538. Genshin began to practice the heaven-severing technique. The difficulty of practicing the heaven-severing technique was indeed incomparable to the soul-destroying technique. Not only was this because the heaven-severing technique was more profound and required a stricter control over martial soul force, but the most important factor was that the heaven-severing technique consumed an extremely large amount of martial soul force. With Genshin's current martial soul force, he could use the soul-destroying technique over a dozen times in a single go. As a result, he grasped the soul-destroying technique extremely quickly. However, no matter how vast his martial soul force was, it would consume half of his martial soul force every time he used the heaven-severing technique. After 2 uses, his martial soul force would be completely depleted, and he would need to replenish it. Condensing the heaven-severing technique is far more difficult than condensing the soul-destroying technique. It's already been half a month. I've condensed the heaven-severing technique countless times, but I haven't succeeded even once. All my martial soul force has been consumed when I failed to condense it. Half a month later, Jianqin emerged from the mine. He sat down on the rock before the divine hall again and sank into his thoughts. In the past half a month, he replayed the process of condensing the heaven-severing technique every single time, along with all the details. He did his best to find the reason for his failure. During this time, the artifact spirit that had been making a fuss fell silent for once. It did not continue to provoke Jianqin with words. God damn it. God damn it. Jianqin is practicing a new secret technique for martial soul force again. It looks like he's going to continue experimenting on me. What do I do? What do I do? Do I continue to discourage him? Do I use words to disturb his mind and distract him from comprehending the secret technique? But if I anger him, will he continue to use the soul-destroying technique against me? In reality, the artifact spirit had been paying attention to Jianqin the entire time. It was extremely uneasy. It really did not want to experience the hellish days of being tortured by the soul-destroying technique again. It wanted to disturb Jianqin and interfere with Jianqin's cultivation, but it was overcautious. It had no idea what to do at that moment. Jianqin sat there for 3 days. 3 days later, he finally used the heaven-severing technique again. Martial soul force surged rapidly in his soul, slowly condensing towards a single point. This process lasted for an entire day. Finally, a small black sword that only Jianqin could sense condense in his soul. The black sword was completely condensed from half of Jianqin's martial soul force through a secret technique. It contained extremely condensed martial soul force. It's finally condensed. Jianqin immediately rejoiced when he saw the small black sword. In the next moment, with a thought, the small black sword in his soul immediately shot out from his forehead as an invisible pulse, vanishing from the divine hall in a single instant. The divine hall began to tremble violently as if someone was spasming. The artifact spirit that hid in the divine hall finally let out a miserable cry. Jianqin could not help but smile when he heard the artifact spirit's cry. It seemed like the heaven-severing technique had made the artifact spirit suffer quite a bit. Artifact spirit, how do you feel now? Jianqin seemed to be smiling. Jianqin, you despicable person. You're always using martial soul force to launch sneak attacks on me. What's so great about that? If you really have the ability, remove the suppression from the martial soul mountain and let me have a fair battle with you. The artifact spirit said furiously. A fair battle? Is there any fairness in this world? If there really was fairness, the elder of mountains and seas of your Gloomwater sect wouldn't be hunting me down everywhere as a grand prime. Jianqin's voice became rather cold. The artifact spirit was tongue-tied. For a moment, it was actually rather powerless to refute him. It was an artifact spirit, after all, not an eloquent and crafty old fox. After quite a while of silence, it continued, Jianqin, why don't we make a deal? Stop using martial soul force to attack me, and I'll give you hell water. Jianqin stared at the divine hall calmly and said indifferently, It looks like you're rather afraid of the heaven-severing martial soul technique. Although the heaven-severing martial soul technique can't harm your core right now, it can cause you great pain. However, I'll make it clear. Unless you accept me as your master, you can just stay here obediently and become a target for me to practice the secret technique of the martial soul. Don't even think about making me yield to you. The artifact spirit declined without any hesitation. It was straightforward and decisive, leaving no room for negotiation. In the following period of time on the martial soul mountain, the artifact spirit would constantly cry out. The artifact spirit's miserable cries could be heard from time to time. The heaven-severing technique was far more powerful than the soul-destroying technique. It brought great pain to its mind. As a result, the artifact spirit was tortured to an extremely miserable state by Jianqin during this period of time. It would often wail like a ghost, just short of crying out for its parents. However, it was stubborn. It would rather endure the great pain than yield to Jianqin. Jianqin spent 5 years practicing the heaven-severing technique. After 5 years, he finally reached the level where he could use it instantly. 8th junior brother, you've mastered the heaven-severing martial soul technique so quickly. On this day, Aoyama found Jianqin. He immediately sighed in amazement when he saw Jianqin use the heaven-severing technique with such ease. He arrived before Jianqin and could not help but study Jianqin properly. He praised from the bottom of his heart, 8th junior, no wonder your strength has increased so quickly. When I heard you killed a 9th heavenly layer infinite prime last time, I was shocked for quite a while. Looking at you now, you really are a rare genius of the saints' world. Compared to you, the prodigies nurtured by those peak organizations can only carry your shoes. You flatter me, Senior Aoyama. I was just lucky. Jianqin stood up and clasped his fist towards Aoyama. You don't have to be modest. I know just how difficult it is to practice the heaven-severing technique. It's not something that can be learnt through luck alone. Aoyama continued. Oh, right. 8th junior, the heaven-splitting ancestor of the 9 clouds plane, seemed to be interested in you in the past. He even sent people to forcefully take you back on the desolate plane. Jianqin nodded. That's indeed the case. Senior Aoyama, you've suddenly mentioned this. Has something bad happened? No. There's no bad news, but there is some good news. Aoyama chuckled. Clearly he was in an extremely good mood. He took pleasure in Jianqin's misfortune. 8th junior, you've been practicing the secret technique all day, ignoring the outside world. You probably don't know that something that has shaken up the entire saints' world has happened. What's so serious that it can shake up the entire saints' world? Jianqin was curious. Chapter 2539. What? The heaven-splitting ancestor is being hunted down by the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing? Jianqin was shocked when he heard that. The heaven-splitting ancestor was a peak expert who stood at the apex of the saints' world, second only to grand exalts. His strength was unimaginable. A figure like that could shake up the entire saints' world. If there were no grievances that could not be resolved, even peak experts at the same level would not be willing to offend him. This was because any 9th heavenly layer Grand Prime was a great figure who possessed great abilities. Once they were offended, there would be quite a lot of problems in the future. Yet now, Jianqin actually heard that the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing, EXN, was actually hunting down the heaven-splitting ancestor. While he was stunned, he also felt extremely shocked. On one hand, he was perplexed by why the heaven-splitting ancestor would come into conflict with the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing. On the other hand, he was shocked by the first majesty's strength. He had never thought that the heaven-splitting ancestor would actually be hunted down by the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing as a 9th heavenly layer Grand Prime. This allowed Jianqin to sense just how terrifying the first majesty's strength was once again. It's very rare to see a battle of this level in the saints' world. Right now, basically all the peak experts in the saints' world are paying attention to this matter. Qingshan discussed enthusiastically. He was in high spirits, and he seemed extremely excited. It felt like the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing was not the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing, but himself. Senior Aoyama, why are they fighting? Jianqin asked. An ancient piece of jade silently appeared in his hand. It was covered in the inscriptions of ways. The first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing had given the jade to him when he returned the Inata Tower. With the jade, he did not need to worry about the Elder of Mountains and Seas' innate ability finding him at all. Unfortunately, he did not know that the Elder of Mountains and Seas was already dead back then, so the jade was not very useful to him. Aoyama shook his head. I don't know why they're fighting either. However, I heard that the heaven-splitting ancestor has been utterly humiliated this time. He's been hunted down by the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing for several years, and he's still on the run even now. At this moment, Han Zong walked over from afar. He said to Jianqin, 8th Junior, I heard that you once assisted the current master of Poseidon Palace in the Azure Poseidon Palace. May I ask if that's true? Yes, there was indeed such a thing. But at that time, it was merely a transaction between me and Shaoman. May I know why eldest senior brother has suddenly asked about this? Jianqin spoke, while his heart was filled with bewilderment. Hanzong said in thought, the Azure Poseidon Palace has always been on the 9 Clouds plain under the protection of the heaven-splitting ancestor. As a result, no one in the saints' world dared to set their sights on the Azure Poseidon Palace. However, ever since the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing killed her way onto the 9 Clouds plain, the protective formations of the heaven-splitting clan shattered. The heaven-splitting ancestor was hunted down by the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing, fleeing across the entire saints' world. Now that the heaven-splitting clan is leaderless, many peak experts have snuck onto the 9 Clouds plain in an attempt to take the Azure Poseidon Palace by force. As a result, the Azure Poseidon Palace fled from the 9 Clouds plain. Now, there are many experts in pursuit of the Azure Poseidon Palace. Jianqin became rather stern when he heard that. A man's wealth was his own ruin. Shaoman and Ziyun possessed an extremely precious, high-quality god artifact, like the Azure Poseidon Palace, even though they were not powerful enough. It would naturally lead to quite a lot of trouble for them. After all, he had been hunted down by many Grand Primes when he possessed the Anata Tower in the past. After all, Ziyun and Shaoman were not him. Under the divinations of Grand Primes, the two of them would have nowhere to hide. As for the Azure Poseidon Palace, it would only be able to protect them temporarily. It looks like the two of them are in danger, thought Jianqin. Although he did not have a close relationship with Shaoman and the others, he still found it rather difficult to watch them be harmed. Jianqin, do you have the confidence to rope in the new master of the Azure Poseidon Palace? Hanzong stared at Jianqin with shining eyes. Jianqin was slightly stunned when he heard that. The martial soul lineage had existed for a very long time, and their cultivation methods formed their own system. Was there a need to rope in the Azure Poseidon Palace? Hanzong sighed gently. A sliver of worry appeared on his face. He said, "A few protector swords have suddenly appeared in the Radiant Saint Hall. Every single protector sword possesses astonishing power. With the assistance of these protector swords, the Radiant Saint Hall's strength has increased by several levels. They've become the most powerful organization on the desolate plain now. Our martial soul lineage has lost the right to oppose the Radiant Saint Hall, so we need to rope in allies." Protector swords? Jianqin became doubtful. He had spent some time in the Radiant Saint Hall. Although he did not know much about the heritage of the Radiant Saint Hall, he had a rough idea. Since when did the Radiant Saint Hall possess protector swords? "I can try, but I can't guarantee anything," said Jianqin. Hanzong nodded. "If the new master of the Neptunian Divine Palace allies with our martial soul lineage, at the very least our martial soul lineage will be able to protect them before they become powerful, and we won't be greedy for anything on them. However, if she joins the other peak organizations, she probably won't end up well. A high-quality god artifact might not be able to tempt a supreme expert like the heaven-splitting ancestor, but it's extremely tempting to many Grand Primes in the Saints' world. As a result, you're helping her and not harming her. Let's go. Let's go see the new master of the Azure Poseidon Palace." Hanzong arrived at the top of the Martial Soul Mountain with Jianqin and Aoyama. Before long, Chu Jian, Yu Chao, Yun Ziding, Su Qi, and Bai Rufeng arrived as well. The 8 successors of the martial soul lineage were currently gathered together. 8th Junior, may I ask how confident you are in roping in the new master of the Azure Poseidon Palace and getting her to ally with us? Su Qi stared at Jianqin. Clearly, she cared about this matter very much. After a moment of thought, Jianqin said, "Actually, I don't have much confidence either. I can only try my best." Su Qi nodded. Her face was filled with helplessness. She sighed gently Originally, our martial soul lineage was no weaker than the radiant Saint Hall, but once the protector swords appeared, the gap between our strength immediately widened, forcing us to seek outside help. 8th Junior will be relying on you this time. Roping in the Azure Poseidon Palace is only the first step. In the future, our martial soul lineage needs to establish as many allies as possible, or our martial soul lineage will be in danger, Chu Jian said sternly. The appearance of the protector swords of the Radiant Saint Hall made all of them feel great danger. Han Zong glanced past everyone and said, "We'll talk about that in the future. Right now, let's use the power of the mountain soul to go over. The Azure Poseidon Palace seems to have been trapped. All right, let's hurry up. P.S. Recently, many readers have been complaining about not being able to see any new chapters despite opening the page many times a day. It's very difficult to wait for new chapters. Actually, when Xiaoyao updated every day, he would notify them on his official WeChat account. At the same time, there would be a link to the original version on his WeChat account. There are also some readers who follow the chaotic sword god on other platforms. In the end, some platforms would not keep up with the updates for weeks to weeks. The other readers have already seen the new content every day, but these readers are still stuck on the updates from weeks to weeks ago. As a result, in order to let you know about the updates as soon as possible, please follow Xiaoyao's official WeChat account, XingXingCiao 110. Pinyin was the pseudonym of Xiaoyao Xinqing. There was also a number for the police, or you could directly search for Xinqing Xiaoyao on the official WeChat account. Chapter 2540. 9 stone platforms the size of millstones stood at the top of the martial Soul Mountain. They formed a formation there, and each platform was connected by many inscriptions. Jianqin knew that this was the secret to using the power of the mountain soul to cross through endless space and appear anywhere in the saint's world when he looked at the 9 platforms. The mountain soul did not refer to the soul of the martial Soul Mountain. Instead, it referred to the power manifested by the martial Soul Mountain. However, the martial soul lineage referred to this power as the mountain soul. As a result, the mountain soul's name came from this. The formation formed by the 9 platforms was crucial to drawing on the power of the martial Soul Mountain to connect to the outside world. Jianqin had absorbed a lot of knowledge regarding the martial soul lineage during his time in the sacred grounds. Although he could not claim to know everything, he understood most of it. He knew that he needed at least 5 people to activate the formation. Moreover, the 5 people had to be members of the martial soul lineage. They could not be replaced by outsiders. Moreover, the more people who took part in activating the formation, the more terrifying the power of the mountain soul would be. At this moment, Hanzong, Chu Jian, Yu Chao, Yun Ziding, Su Qi, Bai Rafeng, and Aoyama all sat on the platforms. Jianqin no longer hesitated when he saw this. He made his way to an empty platform and sat down. He looked at the 9th platform beside him and thought, "I wonder when the 9th successor of the martial soul lineage will appear." He could not help but think about the glorious era when all 9 successors of the martial soul lineage appeared. However, Jianqin shivered in the next moment. He felt like his soul seemed to form an extremely obscure connection with the martial Soul Mountain at that moment. It felt like he had fused with the martial Soul Mountain, where there was no distinction between the two. Afterwards, he felt a wave of dizziness. In a daze, he seemed to see endless galaxies flickering and the starry sky changing. This feeling only lasted for a few seconds. When Jianqin returned to his senses, he discovered that he had arrived in a completely foreign region of space. There were many asteroids and shattered star fragments drifting about in this region of space. There was also a violent energy that filled the entire region. Jianqin looked at the martial Soul Mountain below him and discovered that it had become an illusion completely condensed from energy. In that short amount of time, he had left the martial Soul Mountain, traversing an unknown distance and appearing in an unfamiliar region of space. The Martial Soul Mountain sure is wondrous. Just the speed alone is incomparable to teleportation formations that can take people to other planes. Most importantly, it doesn't consume any 5-colored divine crystals at all, Jianchen exclaimed inwardly. At this moment, a huge roar came from behind. Jianchen immediately looked in the direction of the voice. He saw an azure divine hull hovering in the air in the distance. It shone with a dazzling blue light, forming an unbreakable curtain of light that enveloped the divine hull. Outside the curtain of light was a huge chain. It shone with blinding light as it wrapped around the divine hull, completely trapping it. The several dozen primordial realm experts all surged with energy as they used their various abilities to keep the divine hull at bay. There were a total of 7 grand primes among the several dozen primordial realm experts. The rest were chaotic primes. When Jianchen saw the azure divine hull trapped by so many experts, his face immediately sank. This was because the divine hull was the azure Poseidon Palace. The people of the martial soul lineage have actually come as well. I never thought that even the martial soul lineage would become interested in the azure Poseidon Palace. However, Hanzong, I have to make it clear beforehand. Before the azure Poseidon Palace runs out of energy, none of us are allowed to fight among ourselves, just in case the azure Poseidon Palace manages to slip away. It was impossible for the mountain soul's arrival to be hidden from these peak experts. Even from very far away, they discovered it immediately. Immediately, an old voice rang out. The other party was a Grand Prime. His voice boomed like thunder, reverberating through the entire region of space. Then what happens after the azure Poseidon Palace runs out of energy? Hanzong replied from the mountain soul. Once it runs out of energy, it'll obviously be up to our own abilities. A peak expert said coldly. Up to our own abilities? All right then. Hanzong sniggered and controlled the martial soul mountain to approach the azure Poseidon Palace. I'll contact the artifact spirit of the azure Poseidon Palace and see if I can form an alliance with the azure Poseidon Palace through 8th Junior. If they're willing to form an alliance, we'll take action, Hanzong said to the people of the martial soul lineage secretly before sitting down. Jianchen immediately sensed a strand of extremely obscure martial soul force seep out from between Hanzang's eyebrows, carefully spreading towards the azure Poseidon Palace. Martial soul force had always been difficult for others to sense. Coupled with Hanzang's careful control, even the Grand Primes present failed to sense the strand of martial soul force. Martial soul force could ignore all forms of energy. Hanzang's strand of martial soul force passed through all the energy seals without any obstructions. Without alerting anyone, it gently came in contact with the azure Poseidon Palace. The Grand Primes around the azure Poseidon Palace constantly stared the martial soul mountain. They paid close attention to the martial soul mountain's every movement. They were extremely stern. Among them, a few of them even looked at the martial soul mountain in fear and caution, something that rarely happened. The martial soul lineage was renowned across the Saints' world. Although they were unable to break through to Grand Prime, no one dared to underestimate the successors of the lineage. This was because many experts who had fought against the martial soul lineage in the past still felt lingering fear towards martial soul force. Even though they had already become Grand Primes, they did not dare to underestimate the successors of the martial soul lineage as long as they had not reached a higher level of Grand Prime. Hanzong, why aren't the people of your martial soul lineage doing anything? At this moment, an old voice rang out. An old man had spoken. He saw how Hanzang's eyes remained shut, so he felt that something was amiss. We've just crossed through space, so we obviously need to recover. Moreover, draining the energy of the azure Poseidon Palace isn't something that can be done in a day or two. Why are you in such a hurry? Hanzong said calmly. At the same time, Xiaoman and Zun stood together in the azure Poseidon Palace. Their faces were filled with worry and anxiety. Clearly, they understood the situation of the outside world very well. They understood their current situation extremely well. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? If this continues, the energy of the Poseidon Palace will run out one day. Xiao Man paced around frantically. She had completely lost her mind. Xiao Man, don't be too happy. The heaven-splitting ancestor will definitely come back to save us. His battle with the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing should end soon. Zi Yin spoke in a comforting manner. However, a deep uneasiness was also present on her devastatingly beautiful face. At this moment, a short, old man appeared silently. He said to Xiao Man, "Little master, Hunzong of the martial soul lineage has contacted me. He said that the martial soul lineage wants to ally with Little Master. If Little Master is willing to ally with them, the martial soul lineage will help us break free." I don't want to listen. I don't want to listen. I don't want to ally with them. They make it sound nice, but they're actually lying to us. Humph. Do they think I'm that easy to trick? Xiao Man shook her head and said in irritation. Chapter 2541. Xiao Man's face immediately changed when she heard Jinshin's name. Her eyes lit up as she stared at the old man and cried out, "What did you just say?" Jinshin. Jinshin is outside. Isn't that brother Jinshin? Even Ziyan's eyes lit up when she heard Jian Chen's name. She suddenly stared at the old man as the light in her eyes flickered with a wondrous light. There was a sliver of undisguised eagerness and excitement. Jinshin? Is it really him? It's been so many years. I wonder how he's doing. Ziyan thought. She could not help but think about how she had met Jinshin in the past. The old man nodded. It's that Jinshin, but he seems to have become a successor of the martial soul lineage now. I want to see brother Jinshin. Let brother Jinshin in. I want to talk to brother Jinshin, Xiao Man said excitedly. Back in the Heaven-Splitting clan, she had used the pernight or as a condition for the Heaven-Splitting ancestor to save Jinshin. But in the end, Jinshin vanished from the desolate plain. She had no idea where he had gone, which filled her with regret for a very long time. Now, she had finally heard news about brother Jinshin again after so many years. She was extremely excited. Although she had not known Jinshin for very long, Jinshin had assisted her when she first met him on the spatial battleship, which filled her with gratitude towards Jinshin. Afterwards, in the Azure Poseidon Palace, she and Ziyun had been hunted down by many divine King Realm experts. They had been forced into a corner, and in the end it was only because of Jinshin's assistance that the two of them managed to survive. Moreover, she had even obtained the recognition of the master of the Azure Poseidon Palace without Jinshin's assistance. Not only did Xiao Man develop trust in Jinshin after the series of events, but she even began to rely on him slightly. She began to treat Jinshin as her own brother. That's probably impossible. The Azure Poseidon Palace has already been suppressed by the combined efforts of so many experts. Even if Jinshin wants to come in, he won't be able to. The artifact spirit of the Azure Poseidon Palace was bitter. What do we do then? Xiao Man's face became bitter. Her head hurt. Ziyun hesitated before saying to Xiao Man, we're almost out of options now. Once the Azure Poseidon Palace runs out of energy, we'll end up in the hands of those people. At that time, it'll be very difficult to say what will happen to us. If that's the case, why don't we just ally with the martial soul lineage? Jinshin is a member of the martial soul lineage, after all. I think that no matter how bad it is, allying with the martial soul lineage will be better than the experts pursuing us relentlessly. Ziyun's words clearly carried a lot of weight in Xiao Man's heart. Xiao Man immediately nodded when she heard that. She said, all right then, since brother Jinshin is a member of the martial soul lineage, let's ally with the martial soul lineage for brother Jinshin's sake. I believe brother Jinshin will never harm us. Hunzong, why haven't the people of your martial soul lineage taken action yet? Are you conserving your strength so that you can reap the benefits when we run out of energy? Another expert called out from outside the azure Poseidon Palace. When he saw how Hanzong remained seated on the martial soul mountain, he felt that something was amiss. Martial soul force is extremely profound. If you're not a successor of the martial soul lineage, you won't be able to understand its mysteries at all. Hanzong, are you secretly tampering with the azure Poseidon Palace through the wondrous powers of martial soul force? A person in violet and gold armor asked. Battle intent surged from him as the power of slaughter revolved around him. This person was the ruler of a large clan in the Saints' world. He was extremely powerful. At the same time, he was the only expert who did not take the martial soul lineage seriously among all the peak experts present. Hanzong slowly opened his eyes. He looked at everyone and smiled mysteriously. He said, "Whatever. Since everyone wants our martial soul lineage to take action, let's do it." Martial soul array. Hanzong called out. A gleam of light flashed through Genshin's eyes when he heard that. From Hanzang's actions, he could already tell that Xiaoman had agreed to the alliance. Without any hesitation, he immediately formed the martial soul array with the others. The martial soul array was a renowned formation that the martial soul lineage used in battle. It was not complicated, so Genshin had already grasped it back in the sacred grounds. As soon as the martial soul array was used, Genshin immediately felt his vital energies merge with the others, surging towards Hanzong. As a result, Hanzong possessed the power of 8 people from the martial soul lineage. Moreover, as the martial soul array was formed, even the illusionary mountain soul below them seemed to fuse with Hanzong. As a result, Hanzong could draw on the mountain soul's power as he wished. Immediately, Hanzang's presence began to surge. Tremendous energy pulsed from him like a tsunami, producing terrifying shockwaves that caused space to ripple. Something's amiss. Everyone be careful. The expression of the expert in violet and gold changed, and he immediately warned them. Hanzong was clearly using his full strength. He just wanted to waste away the power of Poseidon's palace. There was no need for him to do this. Hanzong, what are you trying to do? At the same time, the other Grand Primes bellowed out furiously. They were all on guard. Oh no, he wants to break free from our suppression of Poseidon's palace. Stop him. The expert in violet and gold understood Hanzang's intentions very soon, so he immediately warned them. However, it was already too late. Hanzong had already arrived before Poseidon's palace. In a single moment, he unleashed 5 soul-destroying techniques. The 5 techniques turned into 5 invisible swords that directly stabbed into the chains that bound Poseidon's palace. The chains were a medium-quality god artifact. They played a very great role in binding Poseidon's palace. Arg! Immediately, a painful cry rang out from the chains. Hanzang's soul-destroying techniques were extremely powerful. They were far more powerful than Genshin's. With the 5 techniques, the artifact spirit of the medium-quality god artifact was heavily injured, causing the chains to dim. As for Hanzong, he had already used his full strength when he unleashed the soul-destroying techniques. The power of the 8 successors of the martial soul lineage and the mountain soul had gathered on him, making him unprecedentedly powerful. He directly threw out a punch. The power was so terrifying that it shattered space and created a hole in the seal that the Grand Primes had created around Poseidon's palace. He directly grabbed a section of the chain with his left hand and pulled hard. With a clatter, the entire chain was ripped out of the Neptunian divine palace. Immediately, Poseidon's palace regained its freedom. Hanzong! The armored king bellowed out furiously. He directly stabbed his spear towards Hanzong from afar. Immediately, the spear shone with blinding light. Terrifying energy gathered and pierced through space with the power of the ways of the world, directly appearing before Hanzong. Hanzang's eyes suddenly darkened. He stared at the spear as invisible martial soul force erupted. Immediately, the spear trembled and dimmed. It slowed down as well, allowing Hanzong to dodge it with ease. Hanzong, your martial soul lineage has actually ruined my plans. At the same time, the other peak experts were furious as well. They all condensed the power of ways, turning them into multicolored, terrifying attacks that pierced through space and enveloped Hanzong. They all understood the power of Hanzang's martial soul force, so they did not dare to use god artifacts. They were afraid that the artifact spirit would be damaged, which would weaken the god artifact. At this moment, the palace of Poseidon's palace had already turned into a blur. It charged out as quickly as it could and landed on the mountain soul of the martial Soul Mountain. It shrank to the size of a fist and hovered before Jianqin. Jianqin, our young master trusts you very much. Don't let the young master down. I'll leave it to you for now. We'll talk about the rest once we leave this place. The artifact spirit of the palace of Poseidon's voice rang out in Jianqin's head. With a flash, Hanzong appeared on the martial Soul Mountain as well. He looked at the palace of Poseidon's palace that hovered before Jianqin and smiled faintly. He said, "We've already achieved our objective. There's no need to waste energy on a pointless battle with them. Let's go back. Hanzong,